True Luna novel has ended. Now I am presenting a new novel to all of you, titled Alpha Nocturne's Contracted Mate. I hope you all will like it. Today I am presenting the first part of this novel to you. I request all my friends to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you. Yes, that's the one. That's exactly what I want, Anne exclaimed, almost giddy with excitement, as she reached forward and ran her hand over the beautiful material. The white fabric seemed to shimmer in the light, and the effect was almost spellbinding. Fantastic! Would you like to try it on now? It's a match for your measurements, but it may need a little alteration, the sales assistant began before Anne interrupted her excitedly. No, it's fine. I'll take it home and have the seamstress take a look if there are any alterations needed. She's coming tonight to make some alterations on some evening wear that I bought for the honeymoon, so it won't be an issue. Anne grinned. With a nod of her head, the assistant packaged everything up and handed her the dress to take home. She couldn't wait to get home and try it on. Anne admired herself happily in the full-length mirror as the seamstress said her goodbyes and left the room with an armful of gowns. She smiled wistfully as she smoothed her hands along the flowing material of her wedding dress. This was the last night that she would be Anne Verdis, daughter of the Alpha King. Tomorrow she would be Anne Lunaris, wife and mate of Brad Lunaris, the future Alpha King. She covered her mouth with her hand and suppressed the squeal that almost escaped from her lips. Finally, she would be out of this God-forsaken wing of the mansion and move to her floor with her husband. She would only have to see her stepmother and stepsister at special functions and would be able to avoid any contact with them on most days. She bit her lip nervously. Should she go and show her dad the dress? He would see it tomorrow, but they had so little time together anymore. It might be nice to spend the last night here with him as his daughter. Anne sighed lightly. She wished her mother was here. Even though her father had betrayed her mother and taken a mistress, Anne couldn't help but feel that if her mother had lived, things would have been infinitely easier. Perhaps she would have had more siblings. With a final twirl and contented giggle, she opened the door of her room and headed out into the hallway. As she made her way past the bedrooms and suites that made up this floor, she could hear a couple's distinct moans and grunts in the passionate throes of lovemaking. She sniggered and rolled her eyes. She hadn't had the chance to be intimate with Brad yet. Anne had been determined to save herself until they marked each other on their wedding day. After they had said their vows and celebrated with the pack, the family would then retire to the inner temple of the moon, where the elders waited. It was a simple affair, with intimate words spoken between the mated pair, and an exchange of vows would happen again. But this time, their wolves would have the opportunity to speak their vows to their fated mate. It was a ritual that encouraged acts of service for each other, and once the ceremony was complete, they would return to their room and enjoy each other as a mated pair. Anne blushed furiously at the thought and stifled a giggle. To wear Brad's mark would bring her nothing but pride. He was loyal to a fault. Fuck, Ada! The banging of the headboard against the wall intensified as Anne froze. No, it couldn't be. Her head turned towards the door that she had been just about to pass and saw that it was slightly ajar. She swallowed nervously as her heart raced wildly. She was wrong. She had to be. Brad! Oh, fuck! Deeper! Harder! Ada's shrill voice begged between breathy moans. Anne's legs seemed to have a mind of their own as she positioned herself next to the crack in the door. She pushed it open slightly as she tried to peer into the dim light of the room beyond, but it wasn't quite enough. She took a deep breath and nudged the door a little more. Her chest felt like it would explode as she held her breath whilst the crack widened. When it revealed her sister lying underneath Anne's husband-to-be, her hands flew to her mouth to stifle the gasp of horror as her heart shattered instantly. As Brad roared his release inside her sister, Ada turned her head towards the door with a smirk. An icy chill descended over Anne as if a bucket of ice water had been thrown over her, and she stood and stared, her eyes wide and mouth slightly open in disbelief. Ada lifted her hand and waved in Ada's direction with a smug smile plastered on her face as Brad collapsed on top of her, kissing her neck tenderly. Anne wanted to scream, to rage, and to sob. She remained silent as she pulled the door closed and balled her fists up angrily at her side. She stared blankly ahead as she made her way down the stairs and out into the night. Anne had walked along in a daze for quite a while, her mind reeling with the scene that she had stumbled upon. They were supposed to be fated mates. What had happened? It was so rare to find the other person made exactly for you that when it happened, the relationships were almost infallible. It was very rare for either partner to seek others out for fulfillment because their wolves simply wouldn't allow it. Anne's wolf Maeve had remained silent throughout all of this, but Anne could feel the fury coursing through her. Maeve had never been one for talking too much. When Anne attempted to talk to her, she would mostly remain silent. She communicated her feelings on subjects enough at the time, and words were rarely necessary for Maeve's opinion. The numbness that had led Anne into the city had begun to fade, and the pain that coursed through her heart was excruciating. She sniffled miserably as she looked around her. Somehow she had ended up in the popular club district of the city, well known for its nightlife. The pulsating beats that emanated from inside some of the buildings did nothing but remind her of the strong, rhythmic heartbeat that she would hear when she laid her head on Brad's chest, and the grief would hit her all over again. "Perhaps you can find a quieter bar," Maeve growled. Anne jumped at the sudden gruff voice in her head, and it took her a moment before she had recovered enough to reply. "But, Maeve, I don't drink. I never have," Anne protested. "No? Well, fated mates don't ever sleep with their mate's sister either. Yet here we are. Now seems like a perfect time to start drinking," she snapped back brutally. Anne bit her lip, unsure how to reply, and she felt the sensation of Maeve sighing heavily. "Even if you don't want to drink, I want something to numb us both. Fratricide is frowned upon, and if I see that bitch again, then you can be sure that she'll get what's coming to her. Until then, find somewhere quiet and drink until I shut up," she grumbled. Anne took a deep breath and lowered her head, hoping that her hair covered her face from the curious glances that were cast her way. They eventually arrived at a bar well known for its high-profile clientele and commitment to protecting their privacy. It was the perfect place to hide for a little while. The doorman stopped her instantly and laughed. "Listen, Missy, I know we're called the Minster, but I think you've got the wrong kind of church. You can't get married here." Anne felt her cheeks flush furiously as she lifted her head to stare at him defiantly. He visibly blanched as he realized who she was and apologized profusely. "Ah, Miss Veritas, I'm sorry with your attire? Wedding dresses aren't usually, and," he stammered hopelessly, stumbling over his words as Anne narrowed her eyes at him, and the golden irises of her wolf peeked out at him furiously. "If I wanted jokes, I would go and see a comedian. I wanted somewhere quiet to drink where no one would bother me," Anne hissed. The doorman hurriedly escorted her inside, and she was shown to a booth on the top floor, reserved only for those with the highest profiles. Being the daughter of an alpha king granted her that privilege, and as she squeezed into the booth, lifting the hem of her dress so as not to get wrapped up in it, she was grateful for the lack of prying eyes. It wasn't long before the manager of the establishment approached her and apologized profusely for the conduct of his doorman. As a way of showing his sincerity, he offered complimentary drinks for the evening. Anne had accepted the offer graciously, and when he handed her the drinks menu, she accepted Maeve's suggestions for drinks and didn't hold back on ordering. After her fourth glass of Bellevue Cabernet, She came to the decision that there was no way that she would go through with this wedding. If Brad could do this to her now, before they were even married and marked, the chances were that his behavior would only get worse. It's the worst kind of betrayal. You should seduce him and let me rip his penis off so he'll never be able to bury himself balls deep in another woman again, Maeve snarled. For some reason, Anne giggled at Maeve's fierceness, and a ripple of amusement ran through her from Maeve's direction. It would be a bit messy, Maeve. I think the rejection should do fine. Anne giggled. Maybe take a man home with you tonight and repay the favor, Maeve smirked. Maeve, Anne protested, her flush from the wine deepening suddenly as she felt her ears grow hotter. Before long, Anne found herself in dire need of a visit to the toilet, and as she made her way through the maze-like corridors of private rooms and private offices, she walked straight into what she thought was the ladies' room. As she adjusted her dress and took a seat in the cubicle, the sound of footsteps entering the room could be heard, and she stifled a giggle. The alcohol had indeed had a drastic effect on her. Although they had a naturally strong tolerance for alcohol, the Bellevue witches had worked wonders with their line of fortified wines. She swayed a little as she stood and turned to flush when she froze. The distinct tones of the two males talking could be heard quite clearly. Alpha, I know you don't want to talk about this, but you really must consider your options, a male voice pleaded. Not this again, Alan. A deep, husky voice sighed heavily, clearly tired of whatever subject this related to. Eavesdropping seems to be a talent that we've recently acquired, Maeve slurred in amusement in Anne's head. Shh, they might hear us, Anne answered, back through their mind link, stifling yet another giggle. If the others find out about the curse, then you know it will lead to bids for takeovers. And what? If I don't have a Luna, I can't rule well? Give me a break, Alan, the deep voice snorted derisively. If you can't produce an heir, the pack's future isn't secure. At least consider taking a chosen mate. And if my mate shows up in the meantime, can you be sure that they would be truthful about that matter? The curse took away your ability to... The curse, what the curse is. Can you be sure that they would be truthful about that matter? The curse took away your ability to find your true mate. Who's to say the blasted witches won't send imposters to attempt to take over the pack? This isn't something trivial to be laughed at, the man identified as Alan answered in frustration. Anne's eyes were wide. Just what had she stumbled into? She didn't recognize the voice, but his predicament seemed to be difficult. As she leaned forward onto the door to try to hear better, the door flew open and she stumbled out, hitting the wall opposite her with a loud grunt. Maeve snickered in her head. Forget to close the door properly? You're not helping, Anne replied as she clutched the spot on her head that had made an impact on the wall and winced painfully. As she looked up, her eyes made contact with the two momentarily stunned males who had been poised to attack and right at this moment were a little unsure of how to proceed now. What? Who are you? Explain yourself. The man whose voice had been identified as Alan blustered at her furiously. She dropped her hand to her side and looked at him incredulously. I explain myself? Don't you think it should be the other way around? What? He started to protest as Anne cut him off furiously. Two grown men using the ladies' bathroom to talk about such nonsense. What are you, perverts? She glared at them furiously. Alan looked at the other man helplessly. The man with the deep voice had adopted a relaxed demeanor, shoving his hands into his pockets as his assessing gaze swept over her. Oh, interesting choice of attire for the men's bathroom, don't you think? He commented dryly with a raised eyebrow. Anne blinked stupidly. Men's bathroom? This wasn't the men's bathroom, was it? She allowed her gaze to travel across the room and noticed the men's urinals on the wall and bit her lip anxiously. Fuck. The man with a deep voice chuckled at her obvious discomfort and turned away as if to leave. We can't just leave her. If your secret gets out, Alan protested loudly as the man with a deep voice turned his head slightly as he considered his friend's words. Eventually, he gave a slight nod before turning to leave again. Alan's eyes switched suddenly to the golden eyes that signified an imminent change, and Anne's heart began to race furiously. They were going to kill her for overhearing a conversation? Let them try, Maeve snarled as she tried to push forward to meet her opponent. Wait, Anne shouted suddenly. You need a chosen mate, and I need a way to get out of this wedding tomorrow. I'll do it. I'll marry you. The man with the deep voice paused and turned to face her suddenly. He took in the appearance of the disheveled, slightly drunk woman in a wedding dress, staring at him boldly, with no trace of fear in her eyes. He contemplated the meaning of this sudden appearance before smiling slightly. Hey, I accept. Alan will draw up a basic contract with you, and we can discuss the final terms when you have concluded your business with your non-wedding. Alpha, are you seriously? Alan protested. That's an order, Alan. He snapped with a voice full of authority as a vivid silver flashed across his eyes. Alan paled slightly and visibly gulped before answering. Yes, Alpha Nocturne, he ground out as he bared his neck in submission to him. Anne blinked in surprise. Alpha Nocturne? What the hell had she gotten herself into? Alpha Nocturne sat quietly and watched Anne shrewdly as she sat at the other side of the booth whilst Alan prepared an initial agreement. He wondered idly why she wanted to get out of the marriage that she had been clearly prepared for so badly. It was a pity, really. The dress looked quite fetching on her. Alan sighed as he hastily typed out the agreement and conferred lightly with Alpha Nocturne about his expectations. On the other side of the table, Anne watched them both nervously. She clutched at the material of her wedding dress under the table, and her stomach rolled uncomfortably. I don't know why you're so nervous. He has a strong pack. It's the most powerful in the country, is it not? I think it is a good deal, Maeve commented casually. Yes, but he has a fearsome reputation, and he has a cold demeanor. I don't actually know the first thing about his businesses, his ideals, just that father hates him. Better to know where you stand with a cold, powerful man than to be in excruciating pain every time your mate sticks his dick where it doesn't belong, Maeve snarled suddenly. Anne grimaced at Maeve's choice of words, but had to agree with the principle. Miss, Alan asked with a hint of irritation. It was evident that he had asked her something, but she hadn't been paying too much attention, and she smiled apologetically at him. I'm sorry, my wolf was distracting me. Oh, really? I assume she isn't too pleased then. Alan smirked. Not at all. Quite the opposite. She thinks that it is a good match. Her exact words were that the contract was better than a fated mate who sticks his dick where it doesn't belong. Anne answered unwaveringly with a sweet smile. Alan almost choked on her answer and spluttered loudly. Alpha Nocturne suppressed a grin at her directness toward his beta. He found it refreshing. Okay. So the standard requirements as stated by Alpha Nocturne are that you will live with him at the pack house of the Dark Moon Pack, and you will assume the duties of the Luna of the Pack for a period of not less than 5 years. Is that acceptable? Alan asked with a look of apprehension when he had recovered. Anne nodded demurely. You will also be required not to disclose information regarding this contract or the Alpha's curse to anyone. The consequences will be both swift and brutal if you do. Is that clear? That's fine by me. I do have a request, though, of my own. Alpha Nocturne narrowed his eyes slightly at her. What was it that she would demand from him exactly? He steeled himself for extortionate demands and retained his impassive demeanor as he waited patiently. You can ask, Alan stated in a non-committal tone, as he waved for her to continue. Anne took a deep breath and smiled lightly. It's nothing major. Don't worry. First of all, before I return to the pack with you, I want to have the opportunity to say goodbye to my family. Second, I want to be able to continue my work at the company of my former pack if possible. Third, I still want to be able to see my friends. Should have asked him for our bastard mate's balls on a platter, Maeve snorted. What is your obsession with his genitals, Maeve? Maybe if he'd kept them to himself for another night, I wouldn't be so damn salty. Alan looked at Anne suspiciously as she returned to the conversation. Well, I won't ask this time, he said hurriedly as Maeve smirked at his response. Clearly too spicy for the males at the Moon Pack, she commented as she stretched languidly, and Anne rolled her eyes internally at her. Alpha Nocturne agrees to your demands. Is there nothing else? He inquired cautiously. Anne shook her head. Very well. We have a business to attend to in the city, so we can collect you tomorrow night from your parents' pack. Is this acceptable? Anne nodded quietly. Very well. Then if you'll sign your name here as acceptance of the first draft of the contract, any further alterations can be made at a later date with both parties' approval. Understood? Anne reached for the stylus and signed and printed her name. Then if there's nothing else, Alpha Nocturne, Alan, I'll leave now and head home to make the necessary arrangements. You should call me Adam. Referring to me as Alpha Nocturne is going to draw suspicious eyes. Very well, Adam. I'll see you tomorrow night. Anne grinned as she stood and made her way out. After she had left, Adam turned to Alan and smirked. Happy now? Contracted mate and Luna for the pack, he said as he leaned back and let his head rest on the high back of the seating, closing his eyes in a satisfaction as he did so. Silence met his words before a cautious voice answered. Alpha, have you ever met that woman before? No, it's just... Spit it out, Alan, Adam said impatiently, his brows creasing in a frown. That woman is Anne Veritas, the Alpha King's daughter, Alan said hesitantly. Adam's eyes flew open, and he stared at the ceiling momentarily before leaning forward and looking directly at Alan. Perhaps it would be wise to find out what we can about her then, who she is marrying, which company she is working for, and why she wants so desperately to get out of that wedding. Alan nodded as he jotted down the requests of his Alpha and began sending instructions out to their intelligence and surveillance team. Oh, and Alan? Yes, Alpha, he said lightly as he paused in his work and glanced up to meet his Alpha's deadly gaze. Don't refer to her as that woman again. She is your Luna from this day forward, and don't forget it. He growled as he stood to leave. After her discussion with Alpha Nocturne and his beta, Anne headed straight home. She avoided the main streets as much as possible in case she inadvertently bumped into anyone on the way home. She swore internally at herself as she scurried through the poorly lit streets. How could she have been so stupid? Not only would she most likely be the hot topic of gossip over the next few weeks, but she had also managed to inadvertently bind herself to one of the most feared and notorious Alpha in their community. That thought alone was enough to sober her up almost instantly, and as she navigated her way through the extensive grounds and into her home, she shut the side entrance door as quietly as possible, desperate not to draw attention to herself arriving home so late at night. She could hear lively voices from one of the drawing rooms, the sound punctuated with laughter as she crept past. Her face hardened as she heard the familiar tones of her stepsister and stepmother, with the occasional comment from her father. Her heart lurched painfully as the sudden feeling of being completely adrift from her once loving father wormed its way into her mind. With a small sigh, Anne continued along the hallway with the skirts of her wedding dress bunched up and held tightly in her arms. She managed to make it to the bottom of the sweeping staircase before suddenly the door of the drawing room behind her was flung open banging noisily on the wall and the sound amplified by the echoey corridors. Anne jumped slightly before freezing as the familiar, sickly sweet tones of her stepsister Ada reached her ears. "Oh, Mom, Dad, look who only just arrived home," Ada announced, feigning shock as she called over her shoulder to them. "I didn't even realize Anne was out. Look at the time. On the eve of your wedding as well. What will people say?" She gasped, clearly determined to put on a good show. Anne whirled around furiously and glared through narrowed eyes at Ada. "Oh my, look at your dress!" Ada exclaimed loudly. "It's positively ruined. How on earth will you wear that now for the ceremony tomorrow?" Ada came to a stop in front of Anne and folded her arms as she ran her eyes disdainfully over her disheveled appearance. She snorted quietly and leaned in to whisper in Anne's ear. "No wonder Brad couldn't wait to be inside me. Just look at the state of you," she sneered. Anne clenched her fingers into fists as she fought desperately to stop Maeve from launching at Ada and escalating this further. "Don't just stand there and take this. The little bitch needs to know her place. Let me teach her a lesson she won't forget," Maeve snarled angrily. "Maeve, we can't. She doesn't have a wolf yet. You know the laws. It wouldn't be a fair fight. And the punishment." "Screw the punishment, Anne. Let me just bite her a little bit. Maybe remove one of her limbs. At least then she'll have fewer appendages to wrap around other people's mates." She snapped viciously as she tried to surge forward. Anne closed her eyes tightly, clenched her jaw, and fought back against her wolf as Ada sniggered. "Oh, what's wrong? Is your little wolf angry?" It didn't take long for Anne to regain control, her wolf slinking off to slump in a corner and growl threateningly. Before long, the rage of her wolf had subsided and silence descended. Anne opened her eyes to glare icily at her sister. "What do you think, Ada? You slept with her soulmate, the one who was intended as our perfect match. I know you hate me, but it was unnecessary," Anne finally replied, her face calm and composed. Ada frowned before her eyes darkened and her face twisted into an ugly mask of spiteful anger. "Unnecessary? I think it was very much needed, actually, if only to prove that I will always be better than you. You swan around here thinking that you're Little Miss Perfect. Mark my words, Anne. I'll make sure that you are nothing and have nothing by the time I'm finished. I'm sick of living in your shadow," she hissed furiously. "Anne, what is the meaning of this? Why were you out so late?" A slimy, sickly, sweet voice called out. Narcissa, Anne's stepmother, emerged from the drawing room with Anne's father close behind. Anne reluctantly tore her gaze away from her stepsister and focused her attention on Narcissa. The two stared at each other for a while as Ada sauntered to her mother's side and tilted her head arrogantly as she turned to face Anne once again. "I needed to clear my head," Anne finally answered flatly, feeling like an exhibition on display with everyone's attention on her. "Oh, but your dress came. How lovely," Narcissa simpered with a poisonous smile on her face. "I'm surprised you didn't hurry down to show your parents before you disappeared out into the night doing goodness knows what," she continued flippantly, her eyes full of malice. Before Anne could stop herself, she found herself snorting loudly. "Parents? I think you're mistaken. Don't you mean parent? My mother died a long time ago, and you are not fit to share that honor with her memory," Anne answered casually. Narcissa gasped and covered her mouth as she turned to face Anne's father with a horrified and hurt expression. "You ungrateful little cow! How can you speak to your stepmother this way?" Anne's father blustered. "Because she's the kind of stepmother that you read about in fairy tales. She's not deserving of a place here," Anne answered simply. She was tired of this forced masquerade as a happy family. The family was supposed to be warm and inviting, with a sense of comfort and security, not cold and unfriendly, with the necessity of having to watch her back constantly with no support. Her father lashed out at the wall next to him angrily as he began to advance toward Anne, growling a warning. Ada rushed across to him and took hold of his arm with a sly smirk in Anne's direction as she feigned an attempt to try to stop him. "Dad, please, calm down. Don't be angry. It's fine. We're used to all the comments she throws at us," Ada whined. Anne glared furiously at the trio as Narcissa joined her daughter in the pathetic act of caring for family members. How could her father not see through this charade? As Narcissa rubbed soothing circles on her father's back, she focused her attention on Anne again. "Please, Anne, you know your father's health isn't good. Let's not trigger another episode with unnecessary nastiness, she pleaded in a sickly sweet voice. But Anne didn't miss the smirk that danced on her lips. "You should take a good look at your sister's demeanor, Anne. You might actually learn how to conduct yourself properly," Anne's father snarled. "Learn what?" Anne laughed in disbelief. "Learn how to seduce and sleep with another female's mate? Maybe. She seemed to have the talent for it when she was fucking my mate in her room upstairs." Her words hung in the air before a ferocious roar escaped from her father. "How dare you speak about your sister that way? There is no way she would do such a despicable thing." "Sister? Have you lost your mind, father? My mother only gave birth to one child." Anne sneered as she swept her gaze disdainfully over Narcissa and Ada. "You know something? There's a popular saying, isn't there? Now what was it?" "Ah, yes. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. It fits both Narcissa and Ada perfectly, don't you think? Her mother seduced my father and broke his mate's heart, and now her daughter aims to do the same thing. Ironic, really, isn't it?" Anne continued furiously, her face shrouded with contempt. A cold silence descended in the hallway. Her father, Narcissa, and Ada all frozen in shock at the words she had uttered. For years, Anne had remained silent, and now that her life was about to change so drastically, there was no need to keep up with the pretense anymore. The shocked silence lasted only a matter of seconds before her father exploded angrily, shouting incoherently as Ada and Narcissa did their best to calm him down. Anne watched their struggle emotionlessly. It was about time they all heard a few home truths. "Anne, that's enough. You've gone too far. Look at the state of your father. After everything I've done," Narcissa snapped as she grappled with her husband, trying desperately to soothe his wolf. "Everything that you've done?" Anne laughed incredulously. "Tell me which part I should be thankful for, Narcissa. The part where you seduced my father into breaking his sacred mate bond? Maybe the part where my mother finally lost her fight and gave up on life? Or perhaps I should be grateful for the times that you pushed me out of this poor excuse for a family and excluded me in favor of your own blood?" She spat disdainfully. Ada did her best to appease her mother before she whirled furiously and stalked toward Anne, stopping just millimeters away from her face. Anne glared back coldly, the hatred between the two of them almost electrifying in the air. "You have no right to speak to my mother like that. You're right in what you said earlier, though," she snarled, a sardonic grin playing at the edges of her mouth. "Oh, really? I'm surprised you would agree with me on anything." Anne S. snorted and narrowed her eyes warily. "I'll happily admit if there's any truth to what you say. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, wasn't it? You're absolutely right." She smirked and threw her head back arrogantly, glaring down her nose haughtily. Anne steeled herself for the words that Ada was about to throw at her. If she agreed with anything, it was only because it served her purpose. "You were right with that statement. Do you want to know why?" "Not really, Ada. Your little theatrics bore me, quite honestly. I have better things to do with my time," Anne answered casually as she turned to leave. Ada's arm shot out, and she gripped Anne's arm painfully, digging her fingernails into the soft flesh with a smile. "Oh, you'll stay and listen, you weak little bitch," Ada hissed quietly so no one could hear but the two of them. You and your mother are the same, weak-willed, insipid wretches that can't hold on to their men. When they've stolen away, they blame everyone but themselves. Look at you. You're as pathetic as she was. She snorted. Before Anne could stop herself, she had reacted on impulse and brought her hand around in a swift arc. The sound of the slap she landed on Ada's face echoed sharply. It seemed to happen in slow motion as her hand connected, and Ada's head snapped round, the force of the impact knocking her off balance as she staggered to the side slightly and let go of Anne's arm. Anne was breathing heavily as she tried to rein in her own anger. She had never wanted to pummel someone as badly as she did Ada right now. Ada turned her head slightly to grin at her from the floor, and the madness on her face startled Anne momentarily as she stared back with wide eyes of disbelief. "Do you know why Brad chose me over you?" Ada laughed, the sound a little unhinged, as she drew in a long breath slowly. She stood unsteadily and faced Anne again, staying a little out of arm's reach this time as her eyes danced with a hostile fire as she smoothed her clothes down. "It's because I'm carrying his child," she giggled coyly. Anne froze as a chill swept over her. It couldn't be. Then that would mean this had happened more than once. As she wrestled with her conflicting emotions and stared blankly ahead of her in shock, Ada smirked as she began to slowly circle her. "Such a pity that of all the years you spent with him, he simply couldn't get me out of his mind. You weren't enough, Anne. You'll never be enough. When he left you in the evenings, he came to warm my bed. All you ever were was a title to him, a means to inherit a kingdom." Ada intoned quietly, her poisonous words etching their mark painfully into Anne's heart. Then all of the times he left hurriedly were because of Ada. There were never any assignments, family meetings, or pack business. It was all hastily concocted excuses so that he could lay with her stepsister, and she had been ignorant to it the whole time. She felt like such a fool. As much as she wanted to scream and cry and rage, Anne managed to retain her composure and tried her best to close her heart off from the pain. She dug her fingernails into her palm to distract herself as Ada continued her rambling. "Such a pitiful little wretch," Ada tutted with a sneer. "Don't worry, though. I'll talk with my father soon enough, and then it will be Brad and me that are married." She smirked happily as she ceased her predatory circling and stood in front of Anne again. She swept her gaze over Anne once more, the disdain and contempt oozing out of her very being, and leaned in close in an effort to intimidate her. "I told you, Anne, I will take everything from you, and there is nothing that you can do to take it back." Anne stared at her and felt all of the fights leave her. Why should she care now? She had a new plan, and that didn't include ever seeing Brad or Ada ever again. As a strange sense of calmness settled over her, numbing the aching pain in her heart, she smiled serenely at Ada and almost laughed at the look of confusion on her face. "You can have him, Ada. He's not worth my time or my energy. I have bigger and better things to do right now than play your little games. Good luck with your new child and your impending marriage. I hope you don't regret your actions." With that, Anne gathered her skirts in her arms once again and turned to begin the climb up the staircase. The sooner she was out of this stupid dress, the better. Anne woke with a start to the incessant vibrating of her phone on the bedside table. With her heart beating wildly at being forcibly woken unexpectedly, she fumbled around trying to find the damn thing with her blurry vision. When her fingers finally closed around the familiar surface of her phone, she hurriedly checked the caller display and saw the name of her cheating ex flash up on the screen. She narrowed her eyes and pressed the reject button before throwing herself back on the bed. 32 missed calls and a stream of messages across SMS and social media flashed up on her notifications from him. Anne snorted derisively. Her head turned to the side on her pillow and she scanned her room. A wry smile formed on her face as her eyes landed on the discarded wedding dress, crumpled in the corner of her room. She was supposed to be getting married today. The day she had dreamed of and planned for all these years destroyed in merely a few moments. The phone vibrated noisily in her hand, and a quick look revealed yet another call from Brad. She sighed internally and answered. "What?" She sneered into the phone. "Anne, please, you have to believe me. It's not what it looked like." Brad began hastily before Anne cut him off with an incredulous laugh. "Oh, fuck off, Brad. It was exactly what it looked like, and you know it. Don't take me for a fool any more than you already have done. We're done." "Wait, Anne, you can't be serious? One mistake after all these years." "Only one? Funny that." Ada was quite eager to fill me in on all of the glorious details of your sordid relationship over the year that you conducted behind my back. "What? She's lying. I swear, Anne, it was only once and I was blind drunk." "She's pregnant with your child, Brad." Anne spat icily. A cold silence extended between the two of them for a few minutes. Anne wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. She wished Maeve would speak up with some cocky, inappropriate comment, but since they had returned last night, there had been nothing but silence. "Impossible. It's not my child. There's no way," Brad answered, finally, a panicked edge to his voice. "I don't care, Brad. This isn't my business. Find a way to sort it yourself," Anne answered flippantly, already slamming the walls around her heart so that he could never hurt her this way again. "What? Of course it's your business. You'll be my wife in a matter of hours. We can face this together, Anne. We'll work through it." Anne snorted loudly and laughed hard. It was a sound devoid of any happiness and filled with mockery. "You can't seriously expect me to still go through with the wedding after this, Brad. Get over yourself. I refuse to play stepmother to the brat of my stepsister. That's beyond all kinds of fucked up," Anne sneered derisively. "You can't just cancel the wedding. This has taken months to organize. People have traveled from different counties just to be here. What am I supposed to tell everyone? That you stuck your dick in my sister, but then honesty isn't really your strong point, is it? Anne, please." "Fuck you, Brad. I hope your wolf deserts you." "Anne, don't. I, Anne Veritas, reject you." The sound of the line going dead and the resulting tone of a disconnected call bleeped loudly in Anne's ear. She stared incredulously at the phone in her hand. "Did he just motherfucker?" Anne screamed as she launched her phone across the room angrily and watched it bounce off the wall and onto the floor. If Brad thought that would save him from Anne's rejection, he had another thing coming. Anne slid off the bed angrily, and after a quick shower and washing her hair, she began to get ready. Self-obsessed, arrogant little prick. How dare he refuse to listen to my rejection? Just wait until I get my hands on the little twerp, Anne muttered furiously as she rapidly pulled her clothes on and grabbed her phone from the position where it had landed. She stormed out of the bedroom and barely dodged the housekeepers in her fury as she entered the kitchen area, looking to grab a quick breakfast to take with her. The kitchen staff hurriedly passed her a bag with a hastily prepared bacon and egg panini, and she thanked them hastily as she turned and walked straight into Ada. Ada shrieked as the coffee she had been carrying tipped down her front and glowered at Anne furiously. "Watch where you're going, freak. Fuck. This was new. It's completely ruined," Ada wailed. "New? Thought sloppy seconds were more your style," Anne snapped as she pushed past her. "Oh, is the little princess still sore that I'll be marrying her man because I'm a better choice? Really, Anne, you're ugly enough already. If you let jealousy twist you more, no one will want you." Ada's shrill laugh tore through her, and Anne whirled around snarling furiously and rushed towards her. Ada yelped, her eyes wide with fear as she tried to get away from her, but she was too slow. She was slammed into the wall with such force that all the air from her lungs left her. Anne's forearm pressed dangerously against her neck, and she gasped for breath as he stared panic-stricken into Anne's eyes. Anne's eyes were ablaze with a fury that she hadn't known she was capable of, and she snarled menacingly, her tone conveying her deadly intent clearly. "You've pushed me too far this time, Ada. You're welcome to the bastard. Keep him, ride him to your heart's desire, pop out as many pups as you can for him, and live happily. While you do so, never darken my door or speak to me again. Do you understand me?" Ada nodded furiously, rapidly turning a frightening shade of purple as she clawed desperately at Anne's arm. "If I ever hear of my father being mistreated or he meets an untimely demise, know that I will return here with a fury that you have never seen before, and I will annihilate both you and your mother. Do I make myself clear?" Anne roared. Ada nodded furiously again, her eyes beginning to roll up into her skull, and her attempts to wrestle Anne's arm from its position on her neck became weaker. With a snort, Anne released Ada roughly, and with a final look of contempt over her shoulder, made her way to the front door. "What is the meaning of this?" Her father's voice shouted angrily from behind her, and Narcissa's terrified shrieks sounded as she fussed over Ada from the position she had slumped in. Anne paused and turned slowly to face her father. "I'm stepping aside. I won't be marrying Brad today, or ever, in fact," Anne answered calmly. "You can't just call off." "Ada is pregnant with Brad's child," Anne retorted coolly, cutting her father off. Her father blanched as Narcissa's genuine shock gasp forced an ironic smile to play at the edges of Anne's lips. That was probably the first time that she had ever heard anything genuine come out of Narcissa's lips. "So you see, Father, I'm stepping aside and allowing Anne to take my place in this marriage." But the alliance," her father stammered worriedly. "There's no reason it cannot be enforced with Ada taking my place. Brad won't be king, but considering both his and Ada's dishonest nature, evidenced by their actions, and his treatment of his fated mate, I doubt the Council of Elders would approve of his ascension to the throne anyway." Anne smirked as she turned to leave. "Wait, Anne, where are you going?" her father called with genuine concern in his voice. Anne smiled bitterly as she turned to face him. "I've made other arrangements. They shouldn't impact you too much, but I'll be gone for a few years. I may be back to collect my things, or I may send someone in my place. Either way, take care of yourself, Father. I'll see you when I return. If I return." With that, Anne turned sharply to the sound of her father's protests and Narcissa's shrill admonishments to her daughter, and made her way to her car. As soon as the car door closed behind her, her fierce exterior and anger dissolved. Anne's face crumpled as the grief she felt at the loss of her future and her family crashed over her in a wave of sadness, and the tears flowed freely. Anne drove around aimlessly for a few hours, following the roads on a whim and driving out of the city outskirts and through rolling countryside, the meandering hills and fields, almost like a soothing medicine for her soul. She had cried all that she had wanted to, and the further she got from the place she called home, the better she felt. She glanced to her side at the phone that lay on the passenger seat of her car. In her fury, she had managed to crack the screen when she had thrown it at the wall. She rolled her eyes at herself and felt her wolf snigger. "Oh, now you make an appearance. Where were you when it was all kicking off?" Anne muttered angrily. "I was sleepy, so I went to sleep," Maeve answered nonchalantly. "Awesome timing for you to do that," Anne replied sarcastically. "Well, there was no face ripping or limb removing for me to help with, and the Bellevue witches clearly know how to knock a wolf out with that concoction of theirs. That's the last time I listened to you about drinking, Maeve. Clearly, neither of us can handle it." "Puh, speak for yourself, you lightweight. I was pleasantly warm. And where did that get us? Contract marriage with Alpha Nocturne, the main rival of my father's business interests, and a strong contender for next in line to be king if the Veritas heirs don't prove themselves worthy. Anne snorted. I suppose it's a good job that the rival for the king's position is marrying one of his daughters then, Maeve said slowly with a sarcastic edge to her words. Anne gripped the steering wheel in horror. Oh, fuck, Dad's gonna kill me when he finds out, Anne whispered into the silence of the car. If he finds out? Maeve smirked with a chuckle. Her father absolutely hated Alpha Nocturne with a passion. She had a strong feeling it was because he reminded her father of himself in his younger years. Ruthless, uncompromising, and ambitious, Alpha Nocturne had rapidly made a name for himself both in pack politics and the business circles. With his strong leadership and his pack's rise in power and territory, he was a force to be reckoned with. I don't know why you're so bothered about your father's reaction. He abandoned you in favor of his new family. You don't turn on your own blood. It's disgusting, Maeve snarled. Anne was quiet for a little while, contemplating her wolf's words. She knew she was right, but it still stung. He might have turned his back on me, Maeve, but I'll never give up hope that one day, hopefully, he'll see the light. Maeve snorted. Don't you miss your father? Does he speak with you at all? Anne asked hesitantly. She felt a pang of pain and a soft whine, swiftly followed by a snarl of anger. He is worse than your father, constantly silent and never responds to attempts to link with him. It's as if he's dead, she snapped. If that's what he wants, then so be it. A shitty excuse for a father for both of us. Anne's mouth set in a grim line as she focused on the road ahead. Just then her phone rang, and the call transferred to the cars in the built infotainment system linked with the onboard diagnostics HUD screen. She touched the screen to accept and answered the call. Hello? Anne, where are you? The worried voice of her best friend came through loudly. Anne flinched and quickly turned the volume down as she answered. I'm driving at the minute. Is everything okay? I was going to ask you the same thing. Listen, I'm at work at the minute, but I finish in about an hour. Do you want to go eat somewhere for lunch? She asked quietly. Sure. It'll take me about an hour to get back anyway. You're only on half days today? Lexi usually worked like a demon, which was fitting because she was indeed part demon. An unlikely tryst between a mid-level demon and a human had resulted in her birth. Her mother died not long after she was born, and the demon was not able to raise her in his realm, as it was simply too dangerous. So she had been taken in by a children's home that specialized in raising hybrids well in order for them to live well alongside the wider population of other supernatural races and the humans that were mostly oblivious to their existence. A half day was practically unheard of for her, and it made Anne start to wonder what exactly had happened that made her so eager to leave work. She had quite a comfortable job at a small company that dealt with accounting, and she had a natural flair for the work. Yeah, only because that asshole of a supervisor I have can't get the formulas for the spreadsheets right. I swear if he fucks up one more, Lexi sighed heavily. Sorry, Anne, work is boring. I'll see you for lunch and you can fill me in on the details that I am so obviously lacking. Love you. See you soon. Lexi finished and hung up abruptly. Anne chuckled to herself and found a spot to turn around and head back toward the city. Lunch dates with Lexi were always an opportunity to let off some steam, and she could almost predict exactly the words of comfort that her friend would have for her. More like plans for murder, Maeve sniggered. Anne grinned to herself. Maeve wasn't wrong in the slightest. Anne arrived at the cafe they had decided on well before Lexi did. She found a table by the window so that she could people watch and ordered a chai while she waited. Even though the weather hadn't quite changed to the autumnal vibe that she loved so much, the rich smell of the milky chai tea had a homey, almost Christmassy feel to it. Secretly, Anne was panicking. She had left home to move in with a man she knew only by reputation and was going to be married to him for the next 5 years. Right now, she wanted the security that the feeling of home gave, and the memories that the smell of chai tea evoked within her were the closest that she would ever come to being wrapped in her mother's reassuring embrace again. Anne was acutely aware of the gaze of the cafe's visitors on her. It was starting to make her feel a little uncomfortable when she saw Lexi jump out of a taxi through the window and hurry inside. She stood squinting in the doorway, her beautiful golden eyes scouring every face quickly before landing on Anne, and her face split into a huge grin. She lifted her arm and waved, shouting across to her loudly, uncaring of the disapproving glances she was receiving from the other customers. "Hey, did you order yet?" Lexi yelled. Anne stifled a laugh and grinned back, shaking her head as she lifted her festive-looking glass and pointed to it. "Chai already?" she yelled, wrinkling her nose in disgust. "Fine. I'll order a drink for pansies, and we'll decide on food in a sec, okay?" Lexi finished, rolling her eyes as she made her way to the counter. "Aw," Anne sniggered as an older woman attempted to berate Lexi for being obnoxiously loud, and watched with a serene expression as Lexi quickly put her in her place. She had missed this. Life had been eventful with Lexi at her side through school. They had been inseparable. It was a bonus that she had been as averse to Ada as Anne was, but she had never been sure if it was out of loyalty to Anne or not. The reasoning didn't really matter, but she was pleased that even though they were spreading their wings in the world of adulthood, some things never changed. "Oh my God, what is wrong with some people?" she exclaimed in disbelief as she sat down, shaking her head and throwing her bag into the chair next to them. "Too human for your liking?" Anne answered dryly. She accused me of being obnoxiously loud, which she found rude and offensive. When I asked why she was here being offended and not dying in a retirement home somewhere, she seemed surprised and offended again that I would dream of saying such a thing. She just labeled me as obnoxiously loud, rude, and offensive. What the fuck did she expect me to say? She snorted. Anne resisted the urge to cackle loudly as she shook her head despairingly and sipped on her espresso. "I don't know how you can drink those. They're so bitter," Anne commented as she gestured to the tiny cup that Lexi held gracefully in her hands. "Because it's as black as my soul," she whispered conspiratorially with a sweet smile. This time Anne did laugh. She had missed Lexi's dry humor and wit terribly. "Listen, Tiger, what's going on with you and Brad, she asked, placing her cup down and staring intently into Anne's eyes. Anne sighed and glanced out the window. "News travels fast then, huh?" "I'm surprised you haven't seen it, if I'm honest," Lexi answered as she leaned to the side and began rummaging through her bag. "Seen what?" Anne frowned. Lexi scrolled through her phone until she found what she was looking for and handed it to Anne. "What the fuck is that cretin doing marrying your man?" she hissed angrily. Anne glanced down at the news bulletin that had flashed up on the screen in the entertainment news. Heir to Crystal Pack. No longer running for next Alpha King. Ditches fiancé and plans to marry her sister. Click here for the full story. Directly underneath was a picture of Ada and Brad staring adoringly at each other at some function or other. Anne snorted and passed the phone back as Lexi folded her arms angrily. "Spill! I want details. I want everything," she instructed firmly through narrowed eyes. With a sigh, Anne told her how she had discovered her stepsister and Brad together. By the time she had finished explaining, the look on Lexi's face was murderous, and her golden eyes were blazing furiously. Suddenly, she slammed the table with her fist and exploded. "What the actual fuck? Has he lost his mind? He chose to bury himself balls deep in that sloppy little whore over a life with you? She shrieked loudly. Anne made frantic shushing noises and smiled apologetically at the other customers and staff as they were rapidly becoming the main focus of attention all over again. Lexi, it's fine. It's better that I know now rather than after we were married today. It is not fine. I bet Maeve wanted to rip his dick off and shove it down his throat. How the fuck do you even go against the mate bond? Ooh, I did not think of that, but told her I'll bear that in mind for possible options if I get a chance to go one-on-one with him. I have a few choice words for his coward of a wolf as well. Maeve interrupted excitedly. Maeve appreciated your suggestion. I sniggered. I thought she might. Lexi sniffed as she sat down again and stared at Anne with her mouth slightly open in shock. I hope you fucking rejected the twat. I tried. He called this morning and hung up on me before I could finish. Anne replied miserably. Cocky little, Lexi muttered before her face lit up and she leaned in closely, whispering excitedly. Anne, let me go burn the wedding stuff. Just a little, I won't destroy the place. If we're lucky, the cowardly bastard will be inside somewhere and I can accidentally on purpose roast him alive. How about it? Can I? Anne looked at the almost childlike excitement on Lexi's face and did her best not to laugh. No, let them be miserable together. She can take my sloppy seconds. Besides, I have bigger things to worry about. I can make it look like an accident, Anne. No one would ever know. She tried again hopefully. Anne shook her head and fixed her with a firm glare. Lexi's face fell and she muttered angrily under her breath. There was nothing really left for it. The only way to distract her now would be to fill her in on the rest of the evening. She picked the remainder of her chai up and leaned back in her chair, eyeing Lexi carefully. She hoped this worked. I'll be marrying Alpha Nocturne soon anyway, Anne stated as nonchalantly as she could. Lexi froze momentarily and her head whipped up at the speed of lightning. Her interest piqued. Are you serious? She breathed before whistling lowly. Talk about out of the frying pan and into the fire. I'm not sure which is worse, honestly. How the fuck did that happen? Wait, how do you even know him? Anne chuckled. Let's eat first, Lexi. I'm starving. Let's order and I'll fill you in on everything. As they ate, Anne explained how her chance meeting with the big bad Alpha came about. She was careful to leave out the details about the curse on the Alpha and the unknown threat he faced, but she was comfortable revealing at least this much to Lexi. She would take the secret to her grave if needed, rather than betray those she thought of as family. When they were done, Lexi sat back contemplatively and massaged her stomach as she greedily eyed the desserts on display at the counter. You can't possibly be able to fit more in, Anne exclaimed incredulously. Is that a challenge? Lexi gasped with mock horror. Because it sounds very much like a challenge. Very well, I accept, she said, deftly answering her own question as she stood and hurried over to choose a dessert. Anne snorted loudly as she hunted for her phone, which had just started ringing incessantly in the depths of her bag. She had forgotten to turn the ringer off, and yet again, more irritated glances were being directed her way. She glared furiously at the caller display and rejected Brad's call as she fumbled with the volume control to switch it on to vibrate. It began to flash for an incoming call again, and without bothering to look at the caller display, she answered. For fuck's sake, what? I don't want to talk to you. If you didn't understand what I said the first time, Brad, I don't have the time nor the crayons to waste on explaining it to you, she hissed angrily into the phone. A resounding silence met her furious tirade before the nervous sound of a throat clearing could be heard. Just so you know, this isn't Brad, and I bet he'll wish that he wasn't himself either when you do finally get a hold of him. The voice on the other end of the phone said with a dry chuckle. Monto. Anne frowned. Then who is this, and how did you get my number? She asked, briefly removing the phone from her ear to check the caller ID before returning it to her ear. I don't have your number saved, and this is my personal phone. So who is this? Anne demanded haughtily, tapping her foot impatiently. This is Alan? Beta Alan, my Luna. Alpha Nocturne asked me to call to ascertain your whereabouts. Oh, Anne answered as the color drained from her face and Maeve sniggered in her head. Ah, Alpha Nocturne has arranged the ceremony for tomorrow afternoon. By the time the ceremony is completed and appropriate celebrations have taken place for the pack, the full moon should have risen. The pack elders are ready and willing, and more than excited, I might add, to welcome you into your position officially as Luna of the Dark Moon Pack. Right. Ironic that the Luna ceremony for the Dark Moon Pack is held on the day the moon is the brightest. Would have made more sense to hold it on a new moon if they were being true to their namesake, Maeve observed as Alan began speaking again. Quiet, Maeve, you aren't helping. I can't concentrate with you interrupting, Anne hissed back fiercely. Luna, Alan's voice inquired with a hint of impatience on the other end of the phone. Sorry. Okay. Perfect. Anne answered distractedly without really thinking about what she was replying to, as she hadn't caught the question entirely. Perfect. I'll have the car pick you up shortly then. Whereabouts are you wanting to be collected from? That's not... Oh, fuck it. Fine, Anne answered in exasperation. I'm at a cafe with a friend. I'll be finished in roughly an hour as long as she doesn't eat anything else. Anne muttered under her breath. A steely silence met her last comment, and Alan cleared his throat awkwardly. I won't ask, he stated simply. The car will be there in roughly 45 minutes. You can decide in the meantime if you want to collect your things from your home personally or have one of our work crew collect them for you. We'll see you soon, Luna. With that, the line went dead, and Anne stared incredulously at the phone in her hand. Lexi slid into her chair and deposited 4 plates of various cakes on the table in front of her. I couldn't decide, so I bought them all. She shrugged nonchalantly. Anne lowered her head into her hands and tugged at her hair despondently. Lexi slowly removed the spoon from her mouth and narrowed her eyes thoughtfully at Anne's stressed expression. Did I miss something? Alpha Nocturne is sending a car to collect me in 45 minutes, Anne intoned as she slumped backward in her chair, allowing her head to fall back and stare up at the ceiling. That's it. I'm blaming you completely. This is why I stress eat. All this, Lexi hissed as she gestured wildly to the food in front of her, is your fault, young madam. Anne lifted her head back up to stare incredulously at Lexi. How is what you put in your mouth my fault? Your life is stressful. Secondhand stress, I'm calling it. Sugar helps me cope. I'll drown my sorrows in a mountain of sugar while you sit and watch me eat to death. She grumbled as she spooned another heap of cream cake into her mouth and moaned in ecstasy. Anne snorted as a commotion by the door drew her attention. Her face fell as she recognized the familiar face of her ex-fiancé, Brad. He was looking around furiously, scanning each face that he met, and when his eyes finally locked with hers, his face split into an ugly sneer, and he began to make his way over, snarling furiously. Oh, for fuck's sake, Anne muttered in dismay. As Brad advanced toward them with a look of fury on his face, Anne watched him with a feeling of trepidation building in her stomach. Lexi noticed her friend's unease and swallowed the last mouthful of cake hurriedly as she frowned in concern. Hey, Anne? She asked with a concerned line in her mouth. Before she could answer, though, the sound of chairs being pushed hurriedly out of the way caught Lexi's attention, and she turned with a raised eyebrow to see what the source of the commotion was. As soon as her eyes landed on Brad, Her expression darkened furiously as she flew out of her seat rapidly and stood protectively in front of where Anne sat. Her previously crimson eyes began to glow ominously as the dark pupils expanded rapidly and left only a thin band of crimson fire encircling them. Atto, Lexi's face contorted frighteningly into a sneer with her arms folded in front of her as she watched the young alpha through narrowed eyes. He stopped just millimeters away from her. Brad pushed his face close to hers, their noses almost touching in an attempt to intimidate her. Anne almost laughed. Intimidation only excited Lexi. She got a kick out of putting people in their place. "Get the fuck out of my way, Lexi," he snarled menacingly, their noses almost touching. Lexi snorted and extended her arm, shoving him forcefully as she pushed Brad backward a few steps. She flicked her long, manicured red nails across each other as she cocked her head contemplatively at him. "Too close, puppy? Your dog breath will ruin my clothes," she commented casually as she inspected her nails and smirked. Brad growled angrily and stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "I don't have time for this, you fucking half-breed. Get out of the way." Lexi contorted her face into a mask of mock horror, clutching her chest comically. "Oh no, my feelings. How will I ever recover?" She smiled sardonically and tutted loudly. "Someone should really teach you some manners, little boy. First you stick your dick in the wrong sister, and now you're throwing ugly words around in a cafe owned by none other than those hybrids you talk with such a disdainful tone about. I'd be careful if I was you," Lexi warned with a sweet smile. "You might get yourself a nasty reputation, and we wouldn't want that, would we?" Brad growled lowly as he turned his head slowly and looked around nervously, noticing a fair few pairs of narrowed eyes directed at him. He took a deep breath and rolled his shoulders slightly, forcing himself to relax as he ran his hand through his hair. The fury still smoldered in his eyes, but at least his aggression was under control. "Listen, about Ada," he ground out, but Lexi was having none of it and lifted her hand to silence him. "I don't give a fuck about your excuses, and I'm sure Anne doesn't care to hear them either," she hissed. "Anne, please, just hear me out," he pleaded as he twisted to the side to try and catch Anne's eye. "I think we should listen to what he has to say," Maeve interjected contemplatively. "Seriously? You want to hear him out?" Anne retorted incredulously. "Yes. Then I can decide how much pain I want to put him through when I forcibly castrate both him and his cowardly wolf," she snarled, her fangs bared. Anne sighed heavily and stood, placing a hand on Lexi's shoulder. "It's okay, Lexi. Maeve wants to hear what he has to say," Anne said calmly. Lexi snorted in disgust, and with a final depreciating sweep of her eyes over Brad, she moved to the side and sat down heavily in her chair, keeping her gaze fixated on the couple before her. Brad seemed to relax instantly, his shoulders sagging in relief as he stared intensely into Anne's eyes. "Thank you, Maeve," he said gratefully as he took a few steps forward and reached for her hands. Anne took a step back and glared coldly at him. "Don't touch me, Brad. Not with the same hands that were all over my sister," Anne stated, her mouth curling into a distasteful expression. He froze a wounded look on his face before dropping his hands to his side. "Anne, please. I don't know what happened. Honestly, I came as we planned and would have spent the night in the guest wing. The last thing I remember is drinking with your parents and Ada. After that, there's nothing. No memory." Anne and Lexi snorted at almost the same time as they shared a look full of meaning. "That's the best you can do? You don't remember it?" Anne sneered coldly. "I swear, Anne, it sounds insane, but it's the truth. Even my wolf remembers nothing. Please, he's furious with the whole situation," Brad pleaded. Anne's heart ached for his wolf. As strong as they were, Stuck inside our bodies, they were powerless to act if they were shut out. Don't you dare feel sorry for him, Anne. One time does not excuse the years that he's been fucking her behind our back. He's not worthy of your pity, Maeve snarled furiously. Her resolve hardened with Maeve's words, and she chuckled humorlessly. Really? Then tell me why he didn't stop you or at least warn Maeve after all of the other occasions you were in her bed. Anne's voice began to rise as her anger bubbled furiously. Brad looked stunned for a second before an expression of confusion flashed across his face again. What? No, that's not. No, there have never been any other times, he protested incredulously. Really? Anne smirked contemptuously. Ada was only too happy to fill me in on all the gory details, Brad. I swear she's lying, Anne. You have to believe me, he interrupted, his voice rising in panic. Hey, actually, I don't, Brad. I caught you in the middle of the act. Ada says she's pregnant with your child. She admitted to this little, whatever it is, between you two, and quite frankly, I believe her. She would bend over backward to take everything from me, and you knew this. So while I worked hard at building and planning our future, you were busy destroying it. A silence had fallen over the cafe as the argument had escalated into raised voices, and Anne could feel the unwanted attention on them. She had wanted to avoid this confrontation in public at all costs. It would do nothing but create bad press for both the royal family and Brad's pack. Who knew how it would affect Alpha Nocturne's pack once the news was out regarding their marriage? Look, I'm over this already, Brad. We're done. So that's it? You're throwing it all away? He snorted incredulously before his face darkened as he glared at her back. You know, I didn't think you were capable of doing it, but I guess I was wrong. It's a pretty fucking low blow having those pictures published before I even had the chance to tell the elders of my pack, Brad hissed. Anne turned and fixed him with a steely glare. I had nothing to do with those pictures. Why don't you go and ask Ada? I'm sure she'll have some delightful insights for you as to their origin. Brad glared at her silently, the rage in him mounting before he finally snapped. You can't do this, he roared as he smashed his fist onto the table next to him. The cups and plates on the table rattled in protest. Anne turned to face him again, her eyes cold and devoid of feeling. Oh, I can, Brad, and I already have. I, Anne Veritas. No! He roared furiously as she raised her voice above his bellowing. Reject you, Brad Lunaris, as my fated mate and the other half of my soul, on the basis of your infidelity with my own sister and your scant regard for the sanctity of the mate bond. Brad glared at her furiously, his body shaking as Anne felt the connection she held to him and his wolf snap. They stared at each other in silence, as a dangerous aura rippled outwards from him. I do not accept your rejection, he ground out between gritted teeth. It seems I've arrived at a bad time. A deep baritone emanated from behind Brad's trembling frame. Or perhaps I came at the perfect time. It continued with a hint of amusement. Anne's eyes widened. She recognized that voice. Of all the times he could have arrived, Alpha Nocturne chose now. I don't know who the fuck you think you are, but this has nothing to do with you, so back off. Brad snarled as he slowly turned around. Anne heard an excited squeal, and as she glanced across at Lexi, she noticed that she wore an expression of delighted horror as she stared expectantly at the two males in front of her. Anne wished the ground would swallow her whole where she stood as she turned with morbid interest to see how this would play out. Adam stood his ground, staring impassively at Brad's shaking figure as it turned to face him. A wry smile found its way onto his face as Brad locked eyes with him and froze. What? This has nothing to do with you, Alpha Nocturne. It's simply a spat between two mates, that's all. It's nothing serious, Brad offered, the tremor in his voice giving his nervousness away. Lexi sniggered. Don't lie, Brad. Anne rejected you for sticking your dick in her sister and getting her pregnant. She grinned, her eyes flashing wickedly as she spoke. Brad growled in Lexi's direction as Adam took on a thoughtful expression and jammed his hands into his pockets. He cocked his head and dragged his eyes over Brad's disheveled appearance and tutted loudly, shaking his head sadly. Is this how the young alphas conduct themselves these days? He questioned with a raised eyebrow. It's a pity. Standards have really fallen since I last visited other packs. Lexi clapped excitedly and Anne felt a pang of pity for Brad. Don't you dare, Anne, Maeve hissed. I rejected him, Maeve. He doesn't need to be kicked when he's down. Kicked when he's... Are you stupid? Why do you care about his feelings when he gave such little regard for your own when he was fucking Ada? Get a grip, Anne. He's getting everything he deserves. Anne scowled. She didn't agree with Maeve on this, and as Brad began to respond, she stepped between them both hurriedly, much to Maeve's disgust. Alpha, please! There are things better left unsaid in public spaces. This shouldn't have happened here, Anne interrupted calmly, smiling up at Adam. Adam was silent for a few minutes as he stared at her speculatively, an unreadable expression on his face before finally he inclined his head gracefully. As you wish, Princess, he smirked, as he lifted his eyes and shared a glance full of hidden meaning with her. Anne felt her cheeks flush immediately, and she shifted awkwardly on the spot. Danon, do you two know each other? Brad asked through narrowed eyes as he glared disbelievingly between the two of them. Anne remained silent. She had agreed to say nothing about this arrangement with Alpha Nocturne to anyone. It would be better if he handled any questions. That way, only the information that he wanted people to know would be out there. Not that Anne cared. She would just rather avoid the drama and gossip of the tabloids for a little while longer. Whoever said all press was good press was sorely mistaken. Adam chuckled as he grabbed hold of Anne's hand and pulled her to his side, spinning her slightly as he did so. She collided clumsily with his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her tightly to his side. Anne swallowed nervously as she watched Brad's face darken. He looked like he was about to commit murder. We were recently acquainted, yes, Adam answered nonchalantly, his arms still held tightly around her. Brad's gaze was focused intently on the spot where Adam had his large hand rested. His fingers curled comfortably around Anne's arm, almost protectively, as he watched Brad's behavior carefully. Take your hands off her, Brad ground out slowly, his lips curved into a menacing sneer. Anne could see Brad's wolf dancing on the surface of his eyes, and she could only imagine the emotions that he was going through. This was not a fight that he could win. Adam chuckled and only tightened his grip around her, grinning wickedly as he did so. She rejected you, Brad. I think you'll find Anne can do as she pleases, and I don't see her resisting. Do you? Brad growled loudly as Adam turned to face Anne, ignoring the aggression that Brad was oozing completely. He wasn't threatened in the slightest by his posturing. Anne, are you ready to go? The car is waiting outside, Adam said with a smile that would make any woman melt instantly. You aren't taking her anywhere, Brad snapped, reaching for Anne, and she stepped back. As I said before, that is her decision to make, Adam said firmly. He took a step towards Brad, and although his face remained impassive, Anne could feel the tension in the air. He watched Brad like a hawk, silently assessing his every movement as Brad was slowly but surely losing control of his wolf. And then finally he snapped. With a ferocious roar, he threw himself at Adam, snarling and clawing wildly in his direction. Keep your filthy hands off my mate! Adam sighed and with startling speed and agility, swiftly sidestepped his frontal assault, shoving Brad in the back and sending him sprawling across the table to the side. Brad snarled as he pushed himself up quickly, his face flushed scarlet in a mixture of rage and embarrassment. Without thinking, he threw himself at Adam again. Adam snorted in disbelief at the impulsiveness of the young alpha. He waited until he was just inches away and sidestepped again, moments before he would have connected. His arm shot out, and Adam's large hand gripped the back of Brad's neck as he forced him downwards and pinned him to the floor in one swift movement. Maeve purred approvingly at the display from Alpha Nocturne, and Anne rolled her eyes internally at the ease with which her wolf was impressed. As Brad struggled against Adam's grip, Adam merely squatted beside him with a mildly annoyed look on his face. "Is this really necessary? You're behaving like a hormonal teenager," he commented in a bored tone. "If you kept your hands to yourself, I wouldn't need to." "Wouldn't need to what, boy? Make a fool of yourself and give people reason to doubt your capabilities as an alpha?" Adam snorted. "I'll make you regret that. I'd love to see you try again when you put a little more thought into this, whatever this was." Brad growled as he finally lay still under Adam's grip. He was furious. How had he let himself be made such a fool of? His reputation would suffer greatly for this. Alpha Nocturne had already gained himself a reputation as a powerful alpha, and Brad had been looking forward to crushing his arrogance when he ascended to the throne. Now, not only had he shown himself as incapable of that in a moment of fury, but he had also managed to alienate the one person who was truly capable of helping him rise to the throne. Ada was nothing compared to Anne. She didn't even have a wolf, for God's sake. The Pacts would never accept her. She would never rule, and now he was stuck with a pregnant, wolfless partner from an encounter that he hardly remembered. "Mark my words, Alpha Nocturne. I'll make you pay for this," he snarled quietly. Adam leaned in with a grin. "Oh, I'm sure you'll try at least. However, right now, I have some place to be, and I intend on taking your ex-mate with you. She'll be staying with me for the foreseeable future, and there's absolutely nothing that you can do about that," he murmured just quietly enough so that only the two of them could hear it. Adam stood quickly and brushed his clothes down, smoothing the wrinkles on his suit. With a last glance of annoyance at the spot where Brad lay on the floor, he turned and walked towards Anne. He flashed her a charming smile and extended his arm to her, watching her expectantly. "Are you ready to go?" Anne's stomach flipped at the sight of that boyish smile, and she hooked her arm in his. They made their way to the door of the cafe, countless pairs of eyes watching them silently as they made their way out. "Wait, Anne! Your bag!" Lexi's voice shouted excitedly from the doorway as Adam held the passenger side door open for her. Anne paused and turned, seeing the glowing face of her best friend rushing towards her. Lexi flung her arms around Anne's neck and hugged her tightly. "He's perfect," she whispered into Anne's ear before she stepped back with a coy smile. "Don't do anything I wouldn't do." She grinned wickedly and winked as she waved to them both and turned to leave. "That doesn't rule out a lot," Anne yelled after her retreating form. Lexi lifted her arm and threw a middle finger up as she walked away, without even bothering to turn back. When she got into the car, she turned and found Adam staring at her with a blank expression on her face. It made her feel a little uncomfortable, so she turned and grabbed her seatbelt, pulling it over her slowly and fastening it as quietly as she could. When she was done, she held her hands together in front of her, resting on her lap, and stared straight ahead out of the windscreen. She could still feel his eyes on her, though. "I'm going to have my hands full with you, aren't I?" he commented with a sigh before turning the ignition on and pulling away. "That all depends on if he's planning to remove our clothes or not," Maeve sniggered. Anne's cheeks flushed as she shifted awkwardly in her seat. She dreaded to think what Alpha Nocturne's wolf was going to make of Maeve. She was fearless, bolshy, opinionated, and as far from demure as you could get. If he was expecting a doting, the loving mate who never argued, he was in for a rude awakening. They had driven a little way in what Anne felt was an uncomfortable silence, but Anne didn't know what to say. She could see that Adam kept glancing over at her out of the corner of her eye. "So, the young Alpha back there?" Adam said finally. "Did you reject him before or after you agreed on the contracted marriage?" Anne squirmed uncomfortably and stole a furtive glance to try and read his expression. His face was calm as he stared ahead at the road, his full attention on driving. He held the steering wheel with one hand, the other arm leaned casually on the open window, as the breeze playfully ran through his hair. He certainly cut a powerful figure, even when he was in such a relaxed position. Anne sighed to herself as she turned her attention to the scenery passing by her window again. "It's a little complicated," she answered finally. "I actually caught him and my sister in the act on the night that I met you before I met you, obviously. I'd been trying my wedding dress on and was going to show my father. We had been due to get married today, actually," Anne said quietly. Adam's face remained calm. The only thing that hinted at his displeasure was the slight downward turn of his eyebrows. "You confronted them then?" he asked simply. Anne shook her head and laughed bitterly. "No. I left the house and wandered before I came to my senses in front of the bar. My wolf was furious and managed to talk me into going inside. I don't usually drink, actually," she said as she turned to face Adam. "I was obviously quite tipsy by the time I inadvertently overheard your conversation with your beta." Adam nodded slowly. "Do you regret the decisions you made at the time?" Adam asked sincerely, turning to glance quickly at Anne and holding her gaze for a few moments before turning back to face the road. "No. Maeve and I are in agreement on this. There's nothing for me at home. For whatever reason, the relationship between my father and I have broken down, and I do not get along well with my stepfamily. My stepmother and her daughter are very much alike." "What about your mother?" Anne gripped her hands tightly on her seatbelt and scowled. She tried her best to hide the hostility from her voice, but some irritation still seeped out. "She's dead. I'm not ready to talk about it with you yet, if you don't mind, Alpha." Adam glanced sideways at her and nodded again slowly. "And your friend at the cafe?" he questioned casually. "Oh, that's Lexi. I've known her since school. She's not affiliated with any packs." "A rogue? Lone wolf?" Adam questioned curiously. "No," Anne answered simply. She didn't want to go into too much detail because she knew the reputation that demon hybrids had. The packs hated them because of their ancient ties with sorcery and witchcraft. Although the contracts that used to be forged were long since broken, the bad feeling toward the race was still prevalent. Anne would prefer for Lexi to be understood for the person she was, not influenced by an outdated grudge. Adam sighed lightly and shifted in his seat. "I'm only asking, so I know what to expect, Anne. For this to work, we're going to have to put on a united front. I can't do that if I don't know what's going on," he said calmly. "Right. Sorry. I didn't know he was going to turn up at the cafe, though, and I certainly didn't expect that you would be the person collecting me," Anne answered a little sulkily. Adam chuckled. "It's okay. I doubt very much that he's going to bother you again for at least a little while. You did reject him, though, right? My side of the bond is broken. He's refused to accept the rejection, though, so he still shares a link with me." Anne grimaced. Adam was silent for a long time before they turned into a side road. "I didn't think that having you collected by my pack members would help either of us if word got out. So I came instead, thinking that I would be able to explain it away as a friendship. However, He paused, pulling into the side of the road and bringing the car to a stop. Why not? I don't think for a minute that the original plan will work for long. There are too many people that know what I'm doing and when I'm going to do it, long before I've even made my mind up. He sighed as I tilted his head back in his car seat. Anne greedily drank in the sight of his chiseled jawline and his thickly muscled neck. This man was truly a work of art, and she was unable to stop Maeve's thoughts that fueled her uncharacteristic desire towards this man. Look, I know we were going to keep this marriage under wraps for the time being, but I've changed my mind. I don't want anyone to have anything on us that they can potentially use to gain an advantage. I won't move forward with this unless you're absolutely comfortable, though, he said, holding Anne's gaze seriously. What exactly are you wanting to do? Anne asked almost breathlessly, her mind running away with possibilities as Maeve added her own sordid ideas into the mix. I want to announce the marriage, but keep the contracted part hidden. I had originally intended for you to have separate rooms from my own, but I want to ensure that this marriage at least appears believable to any outsiders. Oh, okay, Anne stammered hesitantly. That means sharing a bed with me too, he said slowly, keeping hold of her gaze. Fine, but we get separate duvets, and I want a queen-size duvet to myself, Anne demanded quickly. Adam leaned back a little and looked her over appraisingly. You really have no objections? He asked dubiously. Look, I'm contracted to marry you, right? I'll be by your side as your Luna for at least the next 5 years, and quite honestly, the more people believe it, the less likely they are to cause problems for me. I will warn you though, Alpha, you agreed for me to be Luna of this pack, which means I have an equal say in how things are done. Adam frowned slightly. Traditionally, alphas and their lunas have separate responsibilities. They do. If that's the way you want to run things, then so be it. I will warn you though, if I don't have a say in how you do things, then you can leave any arrangements that I make alone too. Adam looked momentarily taken aback at her boldness, but he could see her reasoning. Anne was most definitely not like any woman he had encountered before. His persona didn't seem to faze her, nor did his reputation. He quickly recovered his composure and allowed a faint smile to play at the corners of his mouth. Very well, Princess. I will accept this as a condition, he said with a smirk as he leaned forward to turn the key in the ignition again. Anne huffed and scowled at him fiercely. I might be a princess by birth, but don't expect me to sit by quietly and do as I'm told, Alpha. Adam chuckled. I wouldn't have agreed to this if I thought you would, Princess. He grinned as he hit the accelerator and sped off down the dirt road, leaving a trail of dust in their wake. Adam's car was waved through the heavily guarded gatehouse without having to stop. The guards stiffened and saluted respectfully as they passed through. Anne felt Maeve's approval wash through her as they drove through the busy streets of the self-contained town. The houses were well maintained, and with a quick glance at the buildings surrounding, she could see that the training grounds were being put to good use and from this distance at least seemed to be in good order. Anne noticed a couple of schools on site and frowned. Alpha, she began. Adam, please, Anne. He interjected flatly with the ghost of a smile on his face. Yes, of course. Sorry, Adam, she corrected hurriedly. You have your own schools within the pack? Yes. I know it's unconventional and doesn't adhere to the guidelines, but I want my pack to be able to think for themselves, he said firmly as he pulled off the road and into a sweeping driveway that nestled between immaculately manicured lawns and flower beds. They can do that at a normal school too, you know? The whole point of having mixed species schools is to ensure the supernaturals integrate with each other as well as the humans. We can't afford for the races to be separated again, Anne replied. I understand that, but how then do I enable my pack to grow and be successful beyond these walls? Here they are taught critical and strategic thinking at an early age. They are encouraged to be active and spar with their friends. Grudges are not tolerated. They are resolved amicably. They are taught the history of the world, not just the human history, but that of the conflicts between races and species. I understand, however, there are other options available, Adam. That's what the academies are for when they leave middle school. They follow the same curriculum instead of being segregated from other packs. But they lose all those years of crucial study, instead gaining years of unmonitored education and the possibility of a superiority complex. Why can't you add those as a compulsory study in the evenings or weekends, or even as residential camps? Anne argued back. So tell me, Anne, if I then introduce these programs after a full day at human school, how is it fair for the children to be studying until late at night or giving up their weekends? It is imperative that they understand everything about the world we live in and why we coexist peacefully without revealing ourselves. The earlier they learn that, the better. But I'm not discussing this, Anne. We aren't doing anything wrong. This is my pack. Our pack, Adam growled lightly. The education we provide will not change, Anne. The pack is free to choose whether or not they want to attend the schools offered here or in the city. Most choose here because we do not tolerate bullying behavior. He snarled. But no. In the mainstream schools, do you have any idea how many of our Omegas are bullied for being lesser than the ranked wolves? How many Omegas do you think are mistreated within the pack structure? Do you think they enjoy mainstream school, where they are subject to the superiority complexes of other wolves from other packs? Or the attitudes of their alphas when I am forced to confront them because our pack members have been so heavily beaten? Anne remained silent. Every wolf, regardless of rank, deserves the same education. Of course, it is not practical for them to hold combat positions because of their wolves' inferior strength and their submissive traits. However, that doesn't mean that they can't teach the theory that dominant wolves need to learn in order to be successful. It doesn't mean that they can't excel in their own careers in areas of their choosing if they so desire. Adam braked suddenly and pulled to a stop in front of an enormous mansion. He sighed heavily and ran his hands through his hair, turning to look at Anne with a hint of disappointment in his eyes. In this pack, at least, Omegas are not forced into servitude. They are the backbone of the pack that provides for all our basic needs. Food, cleaning, hospitals, gardening, whatever it is they do, enables us to not worry about our basic needs so we can focus on protecting and providing for the pack. They might be weaker than us in strength and combat capabilities, but their minds are still sharp and they are skilled in other areas. They are paid a fair wage, work in rotating shifts, and are free to come and go as they please. I won't change this, Anne. I won't compromise on the community and the ideals that I intend to uphold. He finished quietly as he opened the door and got out. Anne sat silently for a moment, trying to take in everything that he had said. She swallowed nervously. I don't see the issue, Anne. You're being pedantic. I think Adam's vision of a healthy pack hierarchy is far superior to the structure and politics in most packs, Maeve offered thoughtfully. I understand that, but it's not how it's supposed to be done. We have established procedures, and just because things are supposed to be done one way doesn't always mean that it's the best way. A good alpha knows this and will challenge established practices in order to improve them, Maeve answered smugly. Anne huffed and took her seatbelt off, turning in her seat and getting out of the car. I think I liked it better when you were quiet, she grumbled back to her wolf as she hurried after the retreating form of Alpha Nocturne. Adam waited at the top of the set of stairs that led from the pathway to the veranda that spanned the width of the building. Anne was a little impressed with the size of the main house. Its gray and white brick were accented with black slate rooftops, and white pillars ran the length of the veranda, various flowering plants climbing languidly along the screens placed intermittently between them. It probably had more in common with a small palace rather than a mansion, just because of its sheer size. It certainly reminded her of the royal palace, although the architecture and design of this house were far more modern. Anne was a little curious about the need for a four-story house, but after the frosty reception she had with her questions about the education provided, she thought she would wait a little longer before she asked anything else. Adam's demeanor was a little off, and he seemed to be a little cold toward her compared to his earlier warmth. He took her hand firmly, with no trace of a smile on his face. "I would prefer it if you would at least attempt not to contradict me in front of the pack. I appreciate that you have different ideas of how to do things here, but any discussions will be held in the privacy of our room or offices. A united front is imperative," he stated in a very businesslike tone. Anne nodded meekly as her heart sank a little, and her wolf tutted in displeasure at her. "We haven't even been here an hour and you've already pissed him off. I agreed to marry him. I never agreed that I would make him like me," Anne grumbled. "He is a strong male who can't find his mate. You rejected yours. I don't know why you wouldn't want to try to get closer to him. So you want me to roll over and agree to everything he wants like a good little wife?" Anne snorted in disbelief. "I never said that. Alphas are touchy at the best of times. Telling them they're wrong is the same as putting a gun filled with silver bullets in their head." "You have to be smarter than this, Anne," Maeve snapped. Anne bit back the sarcastic replies that formed on her tongue and forced a smile on her face. "Of course. I may have differing opinions, Alpha," she began, biting the last word out coldly. "But I am not stupid. You might not be aware of my background, but I'm fully aware of how successful leaders conduct themselves within a pack." "I'm very aware of your background, Princess. I don't think much of your father's choices, his policies, nor the alliances he tries in vain to forge. It seems to turning your backs on your fated mates is a common theme within the royal males and the men they choose to ally with," he replied coldly without batting an eye. Anne almost felt as if she had been struck across the face. She fumed silently as the front door was opened, and he instinctively reached for her hand to pull her through the doorway. A group of staff were gathered in the hallway, lined up in a uniform manner, and bowed deeply, speaking the greetings in unison. As they straightened up and curious glances were cast toward her, she plastered on her face the most welcoming expression that she could muster. She had taken a few years to master this to perfection, but she had succeeded eventually. She had been expected to meet the foreign dignitaries that attended her father's court, and it provided a better impression for the daughters of the Alpha King to sit quietly and demurely, speaking softly to showcase their ability to rule with grace and nobility. Nothing more than pretty little dolls who could be easily molded into what was needed for the royal line of succession. Anne had hated every second of those meetings. She was always complimented on her submissive nature and diplomacy, yet fierce nature on the battlefield. With her and her wolf, two halves of a whole that perfectly complemented each other. If they had known the fiery nature of her personality, there would have been an uproar. The question remained whether she would be true to herself from the beginning here, or whether she would keep her mouth shut. After all, it was only for 5 years. Adam introduced her to the Omega staff and she greeted them happily, while her mind overflowed with conflicting desires. "Welcome to the pack, Luna. Please bear with us while we get to know your likes and dislikes. We will work our hardest to ensure that everything is to your liking." One of the staff spoke out from the line before her. "Thank you for your kindness, but I don't think you'll need to put any extra work into accommodating me or my needs. Please continue to do as you would normally, and if I have any specific requests or needs, then I'll find someone to speak." Anne answered warmly with a smile. The Omega who had spoken merely inclined her head and answered quietly, "As you wish, Luna." Let me show you to your room for tonight, my love, Adam said, wrapping his arm around Anne's shoulder with a smile. He was doing a great job of imitating affection, but as Anne stood closest to him, the fond gaze that he was attempting to mimic wasn't actually filled with warmth as it should have been. It was ever so slightly indifferent. As if that small disagreement they had in the car really had changed his attitude toward her completely. Ah, she returned his gesture and leaned into him, her performance of adoration much more convincing than his had been, and for a moment, an unreadable look passed across Adam's eyes. He cleared his throat and took her hand in his own, and with quick thanks to the staff assembled, guided her up the stairs. Anne grinned to herself. If he wanted to punish her by shutting her out, then she would show how little it mattered to her. As Adam guided her down the corridor and around the corner, once they were out of sight of the staff members, he abruptly let go of her hand. Anne turned her head to the side slightly, cocking her head as she did so, and eyed him shrewdly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Adam, are you annoyed at me?" she asked, a slight hint of amusement in her voice. "No," he answered curtly, without sparing her a glance. Anne fought the urge to smirk as he huffed loudly and increased his pace to walk a few steps ahead. She ignored Maeve chiding her for irritating him and instead turned her head to look at the decor. So far, everything had been tastefully decorated in an oddly satisfying mix of modern design and elegant accents. Sleek lines and original fixtures seemed to blend seamlessly, and the place was spotlessly clean. While the atmosphere wasn't exactly warm and inviting, it did leave the impression that you would be well cared for here. Anne hoped that once she had settled in properly and been here a little while, she could help make the place feel a little homier. It was lacking a little something, but what that something was, she couldn't quite decide. Adam stopped abruptly in front of a large pair of dark mahogany doors with an intricately carved design of the moon goddess on each door. Anne couldn't help but gasp at the workmanship and instinctively reached out to gently run her fingers over the beautiful design. On one door, the moon goddess was depicted smiling at two wolves before her, surrounded by trees and natural rock formations. The wolves' hearts appeared to have an almost ethereal thread flowing outwards from them, and she held one thread in each hand, as if she was caught mid-motion in connecting the two threads. On the second door, the two wolves stood together watching as a litter of pups played happily before them in the same clearing, and the moon goddess smiled down from above at the scene. "Adam, this is beautiful," Anne murmured, completely enthralled by the scenes depicted. His indifferent glare softened slightly at the sight of her almost childlike awe at a simple door carving, and he sighed, jamming his hands into the pockets of his trousers as he patiently waited for her to finish her appreciation. "I think it was my great-grandfather that had those commissioned, several in fact. I think you'll enjoy your stay here if this kind of thing excites you." Anne nodded absent-mindedly. "It does. I mean, why wouldn't it? The craftsmanship is stunning. The hours that must have gone into making this. And you say it's hundreds of years old?" Anne questioned curiously, turning to face him. "I never said that, only that my great-grandfather commissioned this. The male line of my ancestry never lived to their full potential, unfortunately. But we'll discuss that another time," Adam replied as a shadow crossed his face. He cleared his throat and reached past her, pressing down on the handle and pushing the door open. Adam gestured for her to enter the room, and as she stepped through the door, Anne was rendered speechless. "Adam, it's stunning. All of it. I don't know what to say." "This is the bridal suite, formerly Luna's private suite," Adam explained softly as he ran a hand over the dresser top. "As short-lived as my ancestors were, the Lunas have always been incredibly strong-willed and passionate. My great-grandmother demanded a suite where she could escape from her husband when they had argued. He chuckled softly at the memory, and a flash of nostalgia swept across his expression. Oh, oh, Anne exclaimed quietly. Had you changed your mind about sharing a room then? Adam suppressed a smirk. He didn't miss the trace of disappointment in her voice as she tried desperately to avoid his gaze. He cleared his throat lightly before he spoke. My request still stands. I intend to have Alan add the terms to the agreed contract. However, traditionally, we won't spend the night before the wedding together. It's intended to remind each party of how they would feel apart from each other. A time for reflection, if you will. I know. I met you on the eve of my wedding, remember? Anne answered a little bitterly. Adam sighed. About your things, I'll send someone to pick them up if you want. I understand the whole situation is a little uncomfortable right now. You don't need to put yourself in that situation tonight. Anne nodded quietly. It's probably for the best. I don't want to see any of them for the foreseeable future. This is my home now, for the next 5 years at least. But Alpha? I don't expect you to give me the cold shoulder if you are displeased with things I ask or say. I would rather you speak to me honestly rather than play childish games and try to gaslight me into behaving in a way that you think I should behave. Adam was silent for a while as he stared at her, his glance seemingly weighing the weight of her words. I think if you're going to make statements about the way I run my pack without even seeing it first, then you should at least expect some sort of reaction. These are not games that I'm playing, Anne, merely the disappointment I felt at your words being expressed. I don't ordinarily stand by quietly when I'm irritated. Be thankful that I didn't react in the way that I usually do, he answered finally, the matter-of-factly. Anne held his gaze for a while longer before averting her eyes and forcing herself to bite back the sarcastic retort she longed to throw at him, narrowing her eyes at the luxurious bed instead. Did you want a tour of the pack, or would you rather wait for the official ceremonies to die down? He asked levelly. I think I'll stay in my room for now. Thank you, Alpha. Very well, princess. Just shout if you need anything. I'll be in my room across the hall from you. Do shout if you need anything. I think I can manage. Very well. In that case, I can arrange for the Omegas to bring you some food up, or we can eat together. I don't have an appetite, to be honest, Alpha. I think I'll take a bath and retire to bed. It's been a crappy few days, and who knows what tomorrow will bring. I would rather be well rested if I'm to face an entirely unfamiliar pack. Adam nodded and smiled gently. As you wish. Then I'll say good night. I'll collect you in the morning for breakfast. With those final words, Adam turned abruptly and headed straight out of the door, shutting it firmly behind him. Anne snarled in frustration and threw herself on the bed in anger. Adam stood at the other side of the closed door and smiled to himself. He had certainly managed to find himself a feisty Luna, as temporary as it may be. Anne was true to her word and didn't leave the suite all night, eventually falling into a deep sleep in the luxuriously soft bed. She was woken abruptly by a sharp knock on the door and, for a few seconds at least, forgot where she was entirely. Anne, it's almost 11. Did you want breakfast in your room or do you want to come down with me? Adam's bored tone came from the other side of the door. Anne swore under her breath and hurriedly began untangling herself from her bedsheets. I'll be right there. Just give me a minute, she yelled back. By the time she opened the door, she was a little flustered. She was greeted by the sight of Adam leaning against the wall opposite her, with his arms folded against his chest casually, and a wry smile plastered on his face. I don't think I need to ask if you slept well, do I? Adam smirked, his eyes sparkling mischievously. Anne glared at him and folded her arms in front of her to mirror his pose. Suppose I don't need to ask if you need a comedian in the pack either. You seem to have that covered nicely. Anne smirked, earning a chuckle from Adam. I'm not just an alpha with a pretty face and a fearsome reputation, you know? He grinned as he reached forward and pulled her towards him, catching her off guard. Anne blinked up at him, speechless for a few seconds, as he gazed deeply into her eyes, holding her tightly by the waist. She could feel the warmth from his body through his shirt, and she swallowed nervously. Adam, I... She stammered nervously as he smirked and his eyes danced playfully. Hush, my Luna, he whispered seductively as his lips brushed against hers with the merest touch, igniting her belly into an explosion of butterflies. She was about to respond when a couple of the staff turned the corner and froze in shock before giggling furiously while apologizing as they hurried away. Adam grinned as he stared boldly into her eyes and gently let her go, removing himself from the close embrace as if it had never happened. Come, let's go and eat breakfast, he stated nonchalantly as he walked away down the corridor. Anne stared disbelievingly after him and felt her cheeks flush furiously. Did he really just use her to perform in front of a couple of unimportant staff members? She wasn't sure how she felt about that, but with her stomach rumbling furiously, she had no choice but to hurry after him. They ate breakfast in a small, homely-looking kitchen and diner area. The cook in there had prepared a heavy brunch with bagels, eggs, bacon and sausage, and a rack of toast for good measure. Anne watched Adam curiously as he buttered each slice of toast thickly with butter and stopped herself from laughing. He didn't seem the type that would overindulge. Rather, he gave off the impression of having a refined taste and a personality that was a little more reserved. However, the stack of food on the plate in front of him and the way he eagerly looked for more told her otherwise. It was most definitely true what they said. Only allow the public to see what you want them to see. It would be eye-opening to see the other persona of the alpha that was so feared. As she lifted her fork to her mouth, her mobile phone buzzed like an angry wasp at the side of her. She frowned as she reached for it and checked the caller ID. Anne scowled furiously as Ada's name flashed up on the screen. Can that little bitch not take a warning? She muttered under her breath as she firmly rejected the call. Who was that? Adam asked curiously. Ada, my stepsister. Anne growled as the phone began its angry buzzing yet again. Doesn't sound like she's going to give up easily, Adam commented dryly. With a sigh, Anne slammed her fork down on the table a little harsher than she had intended and answered the phone. What do you want? Anne sneered. Now, Anne, that's no way to speak to your sister. I am family after all, Ada simpered. The mere sound of her voice made Anne's skin crawl, and she would love nothing more than to unleash Maeve on her and let her do her worst. Unfortunately, that wasn't a possibility. You never call me Ada, just spit it out. What do you want? I don't have time for your games. Fine. You're no fun, though, just so you know. Brad really got off lightly getting rid of you. She chuckled as Anne growled warningly. Don't get your knickers in a twist, Anne. Look, I only called you to invite you to the engagement party. Father wants you there. And I suppose it would be a good opportunity to play happy families for the camera, right? Anne snorted loudly. I have no interest in seeing you parade around with my ex in the slightest. I thought I told you to leave me alone. Was I not clear enough the first time? Ada giggled on the other end of the phone. It's just, I would hate for you to be exiled from the royal family, Anne, especially with your mother's jewelry as heirlooms to the oldest female. Ada trailed off. The color drained from Anne's face slightly and her eyes widened. She suddenly felt sick. You wouldn't dare, she hissed furiously. Well, you'll never know if you don't come, will you? After a short silence, Anne answered. Fine. When and where? She ground out through gritted teeth. Oh, I'm so pleased you accepted our invitation. I'll see you tomorrow evening at 7. In the palace ballroom, obviously. It's the only place that could possibly hold so many people for such a happy occasion. Ada simpered. Anne snorted and hung up, discarding her phone angrily on the surface of the breakfast table. Adam raised an eyebrow at her curiously. "Everything okay?" he asked tentatively. Anne scowled furiously at her phone and jabbed her fork angrily into the food in front of her. She had lost all appetite. "It depends on how you define okay," she muttered, sighing heavily and slamming her fork into the table again. She sagged forwards, her shoulder drooping, and rested her head in her hands. Adam couldn't decide if she was upset or angry or somewhere in between. He reached for his coffee and took a sip. "Whatever it is, Anne, I'll help if I can. We're a team now. If it affects you this way, then it affects me too. I want my Luna to be happy," he said reassuringly. Anne swept her hair from her face and peered at him across the table. "I'm not sure it's anything that you could help with, Adam. Although I appreciate the sentiment, there isn't anything I need to be here for tomorrow evening, is there?" Adam frowned slightly as he thought, and narrowed his eyes slightly. "As long as you return here tomorrow night, then you are free to do as you please. It's only the ceremonies this afternoon to officially bind us and welcomes you into the pack. After that, you are free to do as you please." Anne nodded thoughtfully. "Okay, I have to attend my stepsister's engagement announcement tomorrow, that's all." "The stepsister you don't get on with at all?" Adam asked with a hint of bewilderment. "The very same. If she thinks she's getting her filthy hands on my mother's jewelry, she has another thing coming." Anne hissed, a look of dark determination on her face. Anne had returned to her room shortly after breakfast, having eaten very little despite Adam's insistence. She was in the process of being pampered and preened before the official ceremonies began. The stylists employed at the pack had made a selection of outfits for her to wear during the day for each ceremony, and had instructions to find her something impressive for tomorrow's engagement party as well. Anne suspected that word had gotten around the pack, that not only did the feared alpha appear to be putty in her hands, but that she was also of royal blood. Everyone seemed to be working insanely hard to try to meet her expectations and seemed to be going above and beyond what was necessary. She was offered freshly made snacks and a huge array of drinks, and the next Omega that approached her cocked her head curiously and attempted to strike up a conversation. "Is all this really necessary?" "All what, Luna?" she replied with a little frown. "All of this." Anne gestured wildly to the hive of activity in her room in a little disbelief. The Omega chuckled and placed yet another drink in her hand. "Yeah, of course it is, Luna. What sort of pack doesn't care for its leaders? This is to prove that we can take care of you well and see to your needs, whatever they may be." Anne frowned. "It's really not necessary. I can take care of myself, you know. If I need a drink or something to eat, then I'm more than capable of seeing to that myself. I'm sure you all have better things to be doing than taking care of the whims of your Luna." The Omega looked horrified at her words. "Not at all, Luna. This is our job. Once you are mated and marked, you'll be assigned a personal chef and assistants to ensure that all of your needs are taken care of. This way, the only thing you have to worry about is the upbringing of all those pups you'll produce and the traditional Luna duties." She grinned brightly. It was Anne's turn to look horrified. If they had their way, they would turn her into a glorified breeder. Was that even in her contract? Had she missed something hidden in the small print that required her to produce pups every year? "There's no need to look so scared, Luna. You'll be well taken care of here. The little princes and princesses you produce will be adored by all." Despite his reputation, Alpha Nocturne is a good alpha. He takes care of us well. She smiled gently. Anne nodded dumbly. She was really going to have to check the contract over and perhaps ask Adam if she had agreed to those terms. She definitely didn't remember agreeing to them. We were drunk, though, Maeve offered unhelpfully. Oh, God, Maeve, I don't think I'm ready for pups just yet, Anne replied, an edge of panic in her voice. I'm more than ready. I can't wait to have all those little wagging tails and chubby bellies running around our legs, Maeve answered wistfully. You won't have to carry them. You and I do share the same body, you know. We share exactly the same feelings and sensations, Maeve grumbled. Well, yes, but you aren't going to have to push them out, are you? Don't be silly. Of course I'll help in childbirth. Just think, Anne, we'll get to play with them and show them off, Maeve answered happily. We'll have many strong pups that will be the envy of all who see them. Anne scowled in response and suddenly found herself focusing on a different Omega than was there in front of her previously. Do you not like these, Luna? The woman asked, a hint of trepidation on her face. Anne was confused momentarily as she took in the material of the dresses held up before her. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't paying attention. No need to explain, Luna. We understand. It's a stressful day for all of us, so I can't imagine how you must be feeling. The Omega answered as relief washed over her face and the tension seemed to be lifted from her body. We were just wondering which dress you preferred for the elders' binding ceremony, that's all. We couldn't decide between these and we're still learning about your tastes. Her words trailed off apologetically. Anne smiled reassuringly at her and cast her eyes across the dresses on offer. She selected an elegant-looking ivory cocktail-style dress encrusted with diamonds around the outline of the bust and along the straps. The ceremony would be essentially a wedding, without the extravagance of the royal treasury, and officiated by the elders of this pack, and not the king himself. Anne didn't care, though. This wedding suited her needs as much as it did Alpha Nocturne's, and she intended to not only meet the expectations dutifully, but surpass them if possible. If it served to piss her stepsister off in the meantime, then that would only make the whole arrangement more satisfying. Anne grinned to herself as the Omegas finished their work on her hair and makeup, and waited patiently for the knock on her door to signal the start of the day's lengthy events. The planned ceremonies had gone off without a hitch. The pack had welcomed her warmly, and the elders approved of her bloodline, conducting the binding ceremony and formal linking with the pack to loud cheers from all involved. After all, Anne was of royal lineage, and the official union with her alpha elevated the Dark Moon Pack's status greatly. Now they were second in power and strength to only the Alpha King himself. It would be something loudly talked about to anyone that would listen. It also meant that their alpha may one day have the chance to rule as the Alpha King, as Anne was the eldest daughter and the current heir. She met all of the required qualifications for that, a Luna Queen. As Anne and Adam bid farewell to their guests, Anne smiled to herself. Adam turned to look at her and felt the breath almost leave his lungs. His heart beat faster in his chest as he suddenly realized that this woman would be by his side through everything for as long as the contract existed. Looking at her in the soft light of the ballroom, her delicate beauty that was brightened by her smile seemed to take his breath away. He had the sudden urge to take her in his arms and kiss her, but for once in his life, he was nervous about doing so. She wasn't his mate, it was a business arrangement, nothing more. He wasn't supposed to have been moved by her. As he battled with his inner turmoil, Anne glanced across at him and caught his eye. "Adam, is everything okay?" Anne said, frowning as she noticed his complex expression. He frowned and nodded curtly. "We should retire for the evening. It's late," he answered hoarsely, avoiding her eyes deliberately as he took hold of her hand and pulled her along behind him. Anne was too stunned to react at that moment and instead followed hurriedly behind him, her feet moving quickly as she tried desperately to keep up in the ridiculous heels that she had been persuaded to wear. "Adam, wait," she protested weakly, as Maeve sniggered inside her. I know exactly where this is going. What? What do you mean? Our little Alpha is a little hot under the collar. She sniggered. It looks like you're going to get your promised wedding night after all, Maeve continued gleefully. Anne's eyes widened with the realization of what exactly might lay in store for her, and her breath quickened as the anxiety hit. Relax, it's perfectly natural. Besides, it's about time we got some action. Saving yourself for your mate was a stupid idea as it turned out. We could have been having fun this entire time. Maeve grumbled. How can you say that? Maeve, what if we get a second chance, mate? He'll be so angry if he finds out we slept with another. And if we don't? Seriously, Anne, get a grip. Maeve scoffed. The chances of finding your fated mate are low enough as it is, and when it comes to a second chance mate, even less hope of that happening. But if there's still a chance, there is absolutely no chance that I am letting us remain celibate for the rest of our lives. There's little chance of that happening when our heat hits anyway, so isn't it better for us to find a reliable male to pair with? Anne bit her lip as she mulled over Maeve's words. She had a point. Until now, she hadn't had to deal with her heat. But that wouldn't last forever. Even if she remained celibate, it was common for the heats to start naturally anyway, and if you weren't careful, you would end up mated by the strongest male following a furious fight between those attracted by your scent. Anne grimaced at the thought. It was always messy. Okay, you have a good point. We'll see where it goes, but I won't initiate anything, and I won't allow him to mark me. What if his true mate appears? She would be devastated. She felt Maeve roll her eyes despairingly. I think it's about time you started living for yourself. For us. Alpha Nocturne is a big boy. He can make his own decisions and is perfectly capable of facing the consequences of his actions. Live a little, Anne. Enjoy yourself for once. Anne's heart felt heavy. She was definitely attracted to Adam. Any woman would be crazy not to be. Rich, powerful, handsome. What wasn't there to like? But she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling inside her, as if there was something more that she should know. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't grasp the reason why. They paused briefly in front of Adam's bedroom door, and he pushed it open quickly. Your room? Anne said nervously, with a slight tremor in her voice. We agreed already. He answered gruffly, without sparing her even a single glance as he opened the door and pulled her inside. He slammed the door shut behind them, and Anne flinched, startled by the sudden noise and the drastic change in his temperament. Before she knew what was happening, she found herself being pushed roughly back against the door. A small squeak of surprise escaped her lips as Adam's body slammed against her own, their bodies pressed tightly together against the hard surface behind her. Adam stared hungrily at her, his eyes almost completely black as he growled softly and traced her jawline lightly with his finger. Anne shuddered involuntarily, a delicious chill running down her spine as his intense gaze seemed to devour her soul. Without saying a word, his lips were suddenly pressed against hers, his lips forcefully prizing her mouth open as his tongue sought entry into her mouth. Anne's eyes stared fixedly ahead as she tried desperately to process what was happening to her at this moment. Adam's kiss was intense, and try as she might, she couldn't remember a time that Brad had ever kissed her with such a need. She could feel the passion and primal hunger that burned within him just from the sensual yet fierce way his lips fought with her own. His hands were tangled in her hair, and Anne could feel herself begin to relax into the kiss. Maeve was right. Adam was a good candidate for a chosen mate. As she let go of her doubts and hesitance, she brought her arms around his neck, pulling his head closer to her, suddenly filled with an aching desire to be as close to him as possible. Adam growled lightly, almost possessively, as he felt her reciprocate in the lust he felt at that moment, and he allowed his hands to roam lower, sliding them along the lines of her body, sending pleasurable shivers along her skin. He worked them around her back and found the zip on her dress, fiddling with it briefly before dragging it down slowly. The thought of rejecting his advances at this point didn't even cross Anne's mind, as the embers of her own unsatisfied passion began to burn wildly beneath her. The silken dress slipped from her shoulders and fell to the floor, a waterfall of fabric cascading along her skin and pooling at her feet elegantly. Anne stood pressed against him in nothing but her underwear and a pair of heels. She had always been apprehensive about revealing her body in this way in front of others. But in front of Adam, she didn't feel the need to cover her shyness with her hands. This just felt right. Anne felt powerful and sexy, yet also vulnerable in a way that she wanted to beg Adam to take advantage of her. Her body trembled in excitement as his hands caressed her skin, whilst his lips moved to her neck, trailing his lips and tongue sensuously along her neck. His teeth nipped as his tongue soothed, and his mouth sucked every exposed piece of skin on her neck. Anne fisted his hair in her fingers, wanting more of this delicious feeling. His hands had reached their way to the back of her bra, and Anne felt him smile slightly against her skin as his fingers made short work of the clasp on the straps. His rough hands caressed the smooth skin of her back and worked their way slowly around her sides to begin their assault on her breasts. The moment his fingers brushed against her nipple and he gave it a gentle tweak, she felt her underwear dampen. "Oh, God," Anne murmured as the sensations erupting inside her overwhelmed her suddenly. Adam chuckled against her neck and lifted his head to stare intensely into her eyes as he pulled and tweaked her nipples. A deliciously painful, yet pleasurable sensation that she had never felt before. "Anyone would think you've never been touched this way before," he murmured huskily as he pressed his lower body against her, pushing his rock-hard length against the skin of her thighs. I haven't," she forced out as she tried desperately to shake the fantasy in her head of him filling the void between her legs and satisfying her need that was rapidly building. Adam paused momentarily as his face took on a serious expression, her nipples held between his fingers and pinched ever so slightly. "Are you serious, Anne? No one, not even your mate?" he murmured in disbelief. Anne shook her head gently, almost in embarrassment at the fact that she was still untouched. "No one," she whispered softly as she looked up at him through her long lashes. Adam swore internally. Although this was just supposed to be a lustful fuck, he didn't want to hurt Anne. With his size and the fact that she hadn't even been broken in down there, chances were that this was going to be painful for her. He had consoled himself with the fact that his mate was his perfect another half, and he would save himself for that woman. But now, with the witch's curse destroying the chance of that, he had waited long enough. Anne was his Luna now. If she provided heirs as well as fulfilling her contractual obligations, then it would only benefit him and his pack. Adam growled softly at the vulnerable innocence that was stamped across her face. He had every intention to destroy that innocence one way or another and satisfy her as much as she would satisfy him. "I can't promise that this won't hurt Anne," he murmured softly in her ear as he pinched her nipples between his thumb and forefingers. She moaned loudly at the sensation, and it was like music to his soul. Adam could feel his wolf strain take over as his cock bulged painfully, begging for the sweet release that the place between her legs would provide. "And you need to tell me if you want this or not. But once you do, there's no backing out. I cannot promise that I can control my wolf's urges." "He has waited long enough for this," he growled into her ear. Anne shuddered and moved her hands down to where his cock strained desperately against his trousers for release. "I want this, Adam." She purred seductively between moans as she began to run her fingers across the material of the trousers above his cock. Adam growled as she stared intensely back into his eyes, her boldness and confidence arousing Adam beyond the limits that he thought were possible. Anne smirked. "I'm not scared of you, Adam. Quite the opposite. I want you to fill my pussy and fuck me so hard that neither of us will remember the pain that we've had forced upon us. I might not be very experienced now, but I'm a quick learner, and I'll do my best to draw the same moans of ecstasy from your mouth as you do from mine." The huskiness of Anne's voice, filled with a desire, almost drove Adam over the edge. And without wasting any more time, he picked her up and headed over to the large bed that dominated the main part of his room. Adam stared down hungrily at her as he hurriedly removed his shirt and trousers. Anne forced herself to watch as he slid his trousers down with a smirk, and his boxers followed closely after. Her heart almost stopped at the sheer size of his cock. The shaft itself looked far too wide for her to accommodate, and the bulging head seemed as if it were about to explode. She swallowed nervously as he stroked himself in front of her, and Maeve whistled lowly in her head. "Well, fuck," Maeve whispered in an awestruck voice. "I'll do my best, but this is going to hurt a little. Our alpha is a big boy in every sense of the word." "Maeve, he's going to split me in two with that thing. How the hell am I going to accommodate that?" Anne answered, panic-stricken, as Adam advanced towards her, his hands stroking eagerly at his thick shaft. "Hey, we aren't quitters, Anne. Get a hold of yourself. If the next Luna Queen can't handle a cock, then she's going to struggle with dealing with the bastards at every event. You're just going to have to suck it up. Not literally, though. Well, not until you've had more practice, at least." Anne didn't answer as Adam set upon her. He savaged her mouth with his lips as his hands kneaded roughly at her breasts and pulled at her nipples. His cock had found its way between her slick folds, and as he rubbed his length against her eagerly, she found herself making noises that sounded almost alien to her. His mouth worked lower down her neck until it found her nipples, and he bit down gently at each tender bud before sealing his mouth around them and sucking greedily at her breasts, alternating between them both and driving her into a frenzy. Anne's hands ran along his back and down his side, reaching for his enormous manhood to stroke it gently. Much to her dismay, she realized that she couldn't even fit her hands around it, and she felt him smirk against her nipple. His hand reached for hers and he moved it aside, lifting his head briefly as his mouth hovered above her nipple. "Don't worry, Anne. I'll get everything I need from between your legs. Tonight I just want you to lay there and enjoy it. There will be time enough for you to repay me for this," he said huskily. The sarcastic retort that Anne had been about to utter turned into a scream as he bit down on her nipple end, at the same time as he pushed 2 fingers inside her dripping pussy as his thumb rolled around her sensitive nub. She felt a slight pressure and a sharp burst of pain as he pushed his fingers deep inside her walls. The mix of pleasure and pain rendered her speechless, and as he pumped his fingers in and out of her, he gradually added another finger, curling them inside of her and hitting a spot that made her want to explode every time. "Adam, fuck. It's too much," Anne protested as he pushed a 4th finger inside of her and rubbed furiously on her clitoris with his thumb. Adam laughed darkly. "This is nothing, Anne. There's so much more to come. Your pussy is so tight around my fingers. I can't wait to fill you with my cock." He smirked down at her as he increased the speed of his fingers pumping in and out of her and continued his assault on her. She clawed the sheets with her hands as his weight held her in place and stopped her from squirming too much as she reached her first orgasm in his hands. He grinned triumphantly at the pitch of her cries. As Anne tried to catch her breath, She thought that he would at least give her a chance to recover, but she was sorely mistaken. As she lay panting on the bed, she felt the head of his cock at her entrance as he pushed slowly inside her. The head was enormous, and she panted loudly, whimpering under the sound of his curses of ecstasy. "Fuck, Anne, you're so tight," he moaned as he felt her pussy resisting his insistent advance and her walls wrapping themselves tightly around his member. He moved his hand away from the shaft of his penis and began rubbing furiously at my sensitive nub. The spasms that his frenzied touch sent through her caused her hips to buck towards him, helping his cock slip deeper inside of her, as her screams of pleasure tinged with pain echoed in his room. Adam growled as he fought with his wolf for control. He was of the opinion that he should just bury himself inside of her forcefully. In his mind, it made perfect sense. This way was prolonging her agony, but if he forced himself in, she would adjust to him as he moved slowly after the initial pain. The fact that he had managed to get the head of his cock inside her was a miracle, and he was losing the fight against the urge to bury himself balls deep inside of her. He stilled his movements, lifting her legs a little and spreading them wide before him. He leaned forwards and kissed her softly, deepening the kiss as he palmed her breast gently. As her body relaxed underneath him, he moved his hands to her waist. It was now or never. As her eyes fluttered shut and her walls pulsated around him, he pulled her waist downwards towards him as he thrust forward with all his might. He swallowed her scream as he felt the head of his cock slam into her cervix and smiled to himself in satisfaction. Once Anne had gotten over the initial shock, she was furious with Adam. As the pain subsided, she clenched her fists and brought her hands up in a furious attack, landing almost a perfect right hook on the side of his face. For a second, Adam was stunned and he reacted slowly, pressing his body against hers as he grappled with her to contain her flailing arms. When he finally got a secure hold on them, he pinned her arms above her head and managed to restrain her successfully. His eyes were almost fully black as he glared down angrily at her furious face. Anne glared back at him furiously, the heat from her gaze scorching as she tried her best to wriggle free from underneath him. But every movement made her wince painfully with his enormous cock still speared inside her. "That was fucking unnecessary, you beast," Anne hissed angrily. "I disagree. I warned you at the beginning that there was no turning back once we started, and this way, at least, we aren't prolonging your pain." Adam hissed back. They glared at each other for a few moments, neither one of them saying a word, before Adam's furious gaze softened suddenly. He wasn't sure how to resolve this with his dick still buried inside of her. The whole situation was more than a little awkward. He moved his hips slightly and began to withdraw his cock from inside her slowly, and she screwed her eyes up in pain. He gritted his teeth against his conscience as he pushed himself back inside her, and she moaned slightly, her eyes fluttering closed. "I'm sorry, Anne. It really was the easiest way. It won't hurt for long, I promise," he murmured as he lowered his head towards her breasts, taking a nipple in his mouth and nibbling at the tips as he began to move inside of her. Anne's anger quickly turned into a strange mix of pleasure and disdain. She wanted Adam to simultaneously get as far away as possible from her, but also pound into her relentlessly until she was full of his seed. Before long, Anne was panting alongside Adam as he fulfilled her wish and pounded his full length into her as if his life depended on it. With each stroke, he had constant pressure on her G-spot and slammed into her cervix, keeping her on a roller coaster of pain and pleasure the entire time. He had been right. The excruciating pain at the start didn't last for long, and soon she was begging for him to bury himself inside her deeper and harder with each powerful stroke. "Fuck more, Adam. I want all of you. I'm not going to last long, Anne. You're so fucking tight, he ground out with his jaw clenched. I don't care. Just fuck me. Fuck me as hard as you can. But if I empty inside of you, I want you to fuck. Fill me with your cum. I'll take it all. Every last drop, she moaned loudly. With a possessive snarl, Adam increased his pace to a furious speed, the loud pants and moans of them, both punctuated by the slapping of flesh until finally, with the last few strokes, he froze inside of her and emptied his seed deep within her pussy. He bent his head forward and licked the side of her neck, taking a grip on it with his teeth. Anne's chest filled with panic as she pushed him away abruptly and yelped as the loss of his cock from inside her left her feeling empty. She moved across the bed slightly and pulled the covers around her, determined to cover her nakedness and put some distance between them. Don't you want my mark? We'll be together for the next few years at least, Adam said quietly as he stared at her intensely, trying and failing to keep the hurt from his face. Anne shook her head gently. Adam, I'm happy to do whatever it takes for now. But what if you find your true mate? I don't want to ruin that for you. At least, let's wait a while. And the elders? How do we explain the absence of the mark? He asked, scowling deeply as if he was taking the rejection personally. I'll think of something. Until then, let's wait for a little and see if we can find another way, okay? Adam nodded reluctantly as he lay back in the bed. Anne pulled the duvet under her chin and turned on her side, facing away from Adam. That had not been part of her original plan at all, but she was glad that she had gone through with it. At least now she knew what lust felt like. Was that how Brad felt with Ada when he fucked her every night? She froze as she felt Adam's arm drape lazily over her and listened to the sound of his breathing grow slower with each passing moment. Before long, Adam was sleeping soundly, and she was safely nestled in the shelter of his arms. A strange feeling of contentment washed over her, and for once, Anne truly felt like she had found her home. Anne had woken to the sound of her alarm ringing incessantly at the side of her. She blinked sleepily and checked the time. Shit, she was going to be late if she wasn't careful. She threw the covers off her and jumped out of bed, grunting loudly as the soreness from the previous night rippled through her aching muscles. Anne took a few steps across the bedroom floor before realizing that she was completely naked and froze. What if Adam was watching? She suddenly felt terribly self-conscious and turned to look over her shoulder apprehensively. With a sigh of relief, she realized that his side of the bed was empty, and she turned, collected some clothes, and headed for the shower. I don't know what you're worried about. He's seen all of you and more last night. Maeve yawned sleepily. Well, it's a little different in the light of a new day, Maeve. It's embarrassing, Anne murmured as she entered the shower, allowing the warm water to cascade over her and soothe her aching muscles. Humans are stupid. You were born with skin and choose to cover it with fancy-looking pieces of itchy material. You should be true to yourself. You are a shifter. If you are cold, shift to your animal with warmer fur. If you are hot, then walk as nature intended. Maeve pouted. I'd prefer not to get arrested, thanks. Anne shot back and she massaged her scalp luxuriously, working the shampoo up into a lather. Arrested? Humans could not keep us in a cell? They are easy to escape. Maeve snorted. Maybe for you, but I don't particularly fancy getting shot at just because my impatient wolf decided to break out of a cell. They won't shoot because we'll kill them first. A simple solution to a simple problem. Maeve answered nonchalantly. Honestly, what on earth has gotten into you today, Maeve? Look, it's better to blend in with human society rather than live apart. The hunters are a direct result of what happens when humans are afraid of what they don't understand. Then make them understand? Maeve shot back impatiently. Anne sighed as she got out of the shower and hurriedly dried herself off. She got dressed quickly and dried her hair, styling it smartly so that she would look the part when she arrived at work. Anne rushed into the kitchen and greeted everyone happily as she made a last-minute attempt to grab some breakfast before she left. Adam sat perched at the little table and smiled gently at her rushing about. He quietly mind-linked the kitchen staff to make sure they had a large breakfast prepared every morning for her to take with her, as well as an option for lunch to take if she chose to. Some of the Omegas in the kitchen watched her in horror as she stuffed everything into a bag in a disorganized fashion and turned, freezing as soon as she saw Adam. A guilty look crossed her face and her cheeks flushed a light shade of red. "Everything okay?" Adam asked nonchalantly as he sipped at his coffee. I was a little later getting up then. I'm used to, so I'm in more of a rush than usual," Anne answered. The truth was, she wanted to be at her department in the company early, to make sure that Ada didn't get her grubby little claws into her business as well. It was a good excuse for her to keep busy and not think about the ridiculous engagement party that she was going to be forced to attend tonight anyway. Adam nodded slightly and smiled softly. "Do you have everything you need now?" Yes, I think so. I just need to grab my coat." "Good," Adam said as he stood quickly. He folded the copy of the Financial Times that he had been browsing neatly and placed it down on the counter in front of him. He turned his intense eyes to focus on Anne. Her stomach flipped, and she swallowed anxiously. "I'll drive you this morning," he stated, his tone leaving no room for argument, and reminding her suddenly of his husky voice the night before. Her legs felt weak as he approached her, with almost predatory steps, never once relinquishing eye contact with her for even a second. Maeve purred loudly inside her, and Anne wished for the briefest moment that she could hit her because she was pretty sure that the wave of desire that was washing over her as he approached was coming directly from her. Adam chuckled as he reached for the bag she clutched to her chest like her life depended on it, and leaned in even closer, his mouth mere centimeters away from her ear. "I can smell your desire from here, my Luna. Did I not fuck you to your satisfaction last night?" he growled huskily into her ear. Anne closed her eyes involuntarily and repressed a pleasurable shudder that rippled through her body. Her heart was beating wildly as Maeve danced around happily, begging her to take hold of him and ride him until they fell asleep exhausted. Adam growled a little louder, and when he turned her face to his eyes were almost black. "It seems that your wolf's desires are in line with my own. Perhaps we can take a few hours this morning to enable me to fill your tight little pussy." "No, thank you. I have to work," Anne squeaked suddenly, shaking her head voraciously as she backed away. Maeve roared at her furiously, and Anne angrily shut her out as Adam watched her every movement, as if he wanted to devour every inch of her. She was struggling to think straight under this amount of pressure. "I can make my own way to work, Adam. I don't want to inconvenience you," Anne announced, trying and failing to keep the tremor from her voice. Adam chuckled. "It's no inconvenience. I insist on being the one to take you to work. I won't have my Luna wandering around with her arousal so easily recognized," he answered firmly, almost possessively. Anne shuddered. This was not how her morning was supposed to have started. As Anne shut the car door behind her and she watched Adam speed off, she let out a sigh of relief. The journey had been almost unbearable because of the sexual tension between them both. Maeve had made things even more difficult with her lewd suggestions for scratching that itch, and Anne had resigned herself to the fact that her wolf was insatiable, and it was something that she was going to have to learn how to deal with. She had shut her out in irritation and was still seething when she entered the company headquarters. Anne swiped her key card and nodded to the ladies at the reception desk as they greeted her hurriedly. Anne breezed through the foyer and straight towards the elevator, where she waited patiently for the elevator to arrive that would take her up to the 18th floor. Veritas Estates had flourished since she had taken her position at the helm. They specialized in buying rundown and derelict properties and renovating them before selling them on for a profit. Her predecessor had focused only on commercial properties or acquiring failing businesses before stripping them down and selling their assets. But Anne had seen the potential for highly specialized properties, renovated to fit the needs of the wider supernatural community. Displaced packs and other shifters, new nests of vampires or established nests that had been forced to move. There was a huge market for properties that had already been adapted to suit their needs, and often they were willing to pay whatever it took. Anne had managed to form a close relationship with the Vampire Council and let them know in advance of any properties that would be available in the coming months. They too kept Anne aware of their need for locations, and they shared a profitable relationship in that sense. Anne stepped out of the elevator as it reached her floor and swiped her keycard at the secure offices. Her assistant Eva looked up in surprise and hurried over to greet her warmly. "Mo? Anne, how are you? I wasn't expecting you in this early, if at all actually considering everything that's happened recently." Eva trailed off, her warm smile fading to a grimace. Anne chuckled. "Life happens to us all, Eva. Besides, you know I'd rather be busy with something productive rather than moping about in my own misery." Eva looked at her seriously and seemed to hesitate a little before speaking. "For what it's worth, Anne, I think you deserve better. I always have. You've raised this failing department up to one of the most successful and most profitable under the Veritas brand. You should be proud of yourself. It was no easy feat." Anne felt the color rise to her cheeks in embarrassment. She had never been good at taking compliments. "Really, Eva, it's my job." "No, Anne, it's more than that. You've made sure that your workers are taken care of too, and taken on completely inexperienced members of the packs who wouldn't have ever stood a chance in the corporate world otherwise." Anne laughed. "Look, you know how I feel about that. The circumstances of your birth shouldn't limit what you can achieve. By the time I'm too old to run this, I hope that I'll have children who share the same ethics as I do. Otherwise, I'll put one of my own workers in my former position." Eva smiled warmly at her. "I hope that Ada doesn't mess things up too much for you, Anne. You deserve better than what that rotten stepfamily dealt you." "I wasn't aware that my life was such a hot topic of gossip," Anne answered coolly, with a single eyebrow raised. Had Ada already been spreading her poison within the company? Anne frowned. She knew that she was safe from gossip within her own department, but that didn't necessarily apply to the rest of the company. Eva shifted uncomfortably. "It's not just your life, Anne. The life of the royals is usually followed closely by the office workers and socialites. You know how they can be." She grimaced. Anne nodded and sighed. "Unfortunately, yes, I do. I'm going to check my emails. Were there any messages left at all?" "No. Oh, wait. Yes, you have about 40 or more from Brad." She trailed off hesitantly at the icy glare that had landed on her. "If he calls again, tell him I'm busy. If he refuses to listen, tell him that I'm not interested." Eva visibly gulped and nodded vigorously. "No problem. You go ahead, Anne. I'll handle it. Don't worry. I'll bring you a coffee." "Thanks, Eva." She smiled tightly and made her way into her office at the back. Anne had busied herself with emails for the majority of the morning and sat back with her third coffee of the day, clutched tightly in her hands. She had only taken over this position late last year and was still sifting through the enormous amount of administration that her predecessor had willfully neglected. She had come across an email from one of Alpha's Nocturne's departments regarding a potential collaboration on a large project from a few years ago and pursed her lips thoughtfully. Anne didn't know the full extent of his business interests, but she really should start to take an active interest. All she remembered was her father's frequent bouts of fury over the fact that Adam's interests often overlapped with his own, and he had lost out on more than a few lucrative contracts because he was able to provide better offers. The world wasn't as it used to be, where family favor won you contracts. If you wanted to do business with the humans as well as the supernaturals, you had to prove that you had a talent for what you were employed to do, and not just rely on the fact that you had a big name backing you. Reputations were easily tarnished with the rise in popularity of social media, and Anne had become adept at navigating the ins and outs of gossip columns. It was something that her father and stepfamily were vastly underprepared for. The picture caught of Brad and Ada together just proved their ineptitude. Anne snorted to herself. That was sure to be a car wreck as the years went by. She felt sorry for the child growing in Ada's belly. She hoped that Ada would rise to the challenge of motherhood and put her selfish nature behind her. She frowned as she could hear what sounded like raised voices from the other side of her office door. The sound was muffled, but it was definitely much louder than the usual buzz of conversation that kept her company throughout the day. The sound of a large crash forced Anne to stand abruptly and place her coffee on the table quickly. She began to make her way around the desk in order to find out what was happening. Maeve was tensed and ready to make an appearance if necessary, growling apprehensively at whatever threat she perceived was behind the door. Without warning, the door to her office flew open, and it barely missed her face as she leaned backward reflexively. The disheveled figure of Brad stood outlined in the doorway, his eyes slightly wild as he stared at her furiously. "There you are," Brad hissed furiously as he glared menacingly at her. Anne froze in shock. She was utterly lost for words at his bedraggled appearance and the menacing aura that radiated from him in waves. She quickly flicked her gaze to glance over his shoulder at the area in the office behind him and swore internally at the mess he had made. Eva was picking herself up off the floor, clearly dazed and clutching her head as she staggered forward. A male employee had rushed over to steady her, and as she pointed towards Anne's office, she could see the panic in her eyes. Anne flicked her gaze back to where Brad stood panting furiously and folded her arms defensively in front of her, her lip curling at the edges despite her best efforts. "What the fuck are you doing here?" she asked levelly. "Who was it?" Brad growled menacingly, his teeth bared. Anne snorted. "Did you take a stupid pill at breakfast, or has all the time you spent fucking Ada finally destroyed any intelligence that you had left? If you want me to answer anything, you need to talk in coherent sentences." She sneered viciously. Brad snarled furiously at her and launched himself towards her, his arms extended and his hands closed swiftly around her neck, his powerful fingers squeezing furiously. "You little whore, answer me! Who the fuck was in between your legs last night?" he roared furiously as Anne clawed at her neck frantically. What the hell was happening? Had he seriously lost his mind? "You are my mate, mine! How dare another man touch what belongs to me? I'll rip him apart." "The fucking idiot doesn't like it when he's on the receiving end of the pain, does he?" Maeve snarled angrily as she felt Anne's consciousness begin to waver. "All those years that I took the pain in your place, this is his karma. Now he knows exactly how it feels when your fated mate lays with another." "I'll fix this, Anne. Don't worry," she murmured soothingly. Maeve surged forward as Anne's consciousness slipped away, her golden irises flaring like brilliant fires of demonic vengeance, where Anne's calm orbs once sat. She grinned wildly at Anne's skin and reached her foreign-feeling arms upwards, effortlessly prizing Brad's fingers from around her neck and bending them backward, causing him to yell out in pain. "How do you like it, Brad?" Maeve snarled as she exerted a fraction of her strength to push him back, pinning him against the wall with her arm at his throat as she held his hands firmly. Brad whimpered loudly as he fought to maintain his human form. No answer? She sneered as she abruptly snapped one of his fingers back into the side, the cracking sound echoing loudly in the now deathly silence of Anne's office. Brad screamed his pain as she chuckled darkly. I don't blame your wolf, just so you know. I'm fully aware that you don't listen to him at all, Brad. I pity him being paired with a weak human counterpart like yourself, Maeve mocked with a smirk of contempt. But our glorious future? She sighed almost wistfully before she continued. That will never happen now. You ruined that, Brad. You fathered a pup with another woman, not even a wolf, and spurned your goddess fated. I hope your wolf abandons you, she hissed as she forcibly snapped two more of his fingers, and Brad's scream filled the air again. Maeve smiled in satisfaction as she watched the man before her crumble. Now you know what I went through every time you sank your cock into that little whore's well-used hole. You weren't her first, and you certainly won't be her last. She chuckled. Maeve stared intently into his eyes and he shrank back as far as he could. Maeve was dangerous, and he knew it. How was it? Did you enjoy a taste of your own medicine? The soul-shattering pain as your fated comes undone at the hands of another is excruciating, isn't it? Brad nodded weakly, his eyes filling with tears as he clenched his jaw painfully. From what Maeve could make out, his wolf had turned his back on him and refused to share in his pain, and withheld the ability that would enable him to heal quickly. She smiled sadly at the last show of camaraderie between her and her former fated. Maeve stroked Brad's head and shushed him, her face so close to his that he could feel her gentle exhalations as her bewitching scent filled his very being. Don't you want this pain to end? Maeve coaxed gently. Because I can assure you that I will encourage Anne to take every opportunity to bear pups with the strongest alpha that we can find. It will never be you. You are not worthy of either one of us. Brad stared at her wide-eyed as she smiled sweetly. Just let us go. Accept our rejection. For what it's worth, Octavius, I wish that things had been different. You're a strong wolf, but you need to handle your human properly, she purred. The tears and pain of his wolf were released in a mournful howl as Brad shakingly accepted Anne's rejection. Maeve would never show it, but she grieved for the loss of Octavius too. She had loved him deeply, and he was an innocent casualty in all of this mess. Maeve would make sure that Ada suffered for the pain she had caused one way or another. As Brad collapsed on the floor, sobbing helplessly and clutching his hands to his chest, Eva appeared at the doorway with the security detail at her side. They eyed Maeve warily as she stared sternly back at them. I will not harm you for your failure in your postings, but you should know that he almost killed Anne. I took control before she lost consciousness completely, but she is still not yet fully awake. Get this waste of space out of my sight, and if anything like this ever happens again, I will personally have your heads. Do you understand? She snarled furiously. The men nodded curtly and moved quickly to drag him away. I'm sorry, Eva murmured weakly, the bruising to her face already starting to show. There is nothing to be sorry for. You did your best, and I am thankful. I will not show mercy to those that injure my family, Eva, and you are as good as one of my own. Take the rest of today off to recover. But Eva began to protest but stopped immediately at the fury in Maeve's eyes. No arguments, Eva. However, I would appreciate it if you would arrange a ride for us back to our new home. The number is in Anne's phone. You'll want to call Adam Nocturne. Adam? Eva gasped in shock. Maeve shot her a steely glare and Eva swallowed nervously. Yes, Maeve, I'll see it done. She nodded meekly. making a mental note to ask Anne about the startling turn of events when she next got a chance. Good girl, Maeve nodded as she seated Anne's body in the chair that she loved so much. Now all she had to do was wait for Anne to recover and hand control back. She was curious just how much of this Anne would remember. When Anne finally came back to her senses, she was still in a little disbelief about what had just happened. Maeve had retreated back to her haven and was currently sitting, preening smugly at how effortlessly she had handled obtaining Brad's acceptance of their rejection. I still think it could have been handled with a little more diplomacy and tact, Maeve. You don't always need to fight your way to a solution. Correction. You don't always need to fight your way to a solution. I enjoy it. The adrenaline makes me feel like life is worth living. Anne grimaced as Eva scurried into the doorway and paused, eyeing Anne a little warily. See? You've even managed to freak Eva out. Honestly, I worked so hard with her. I told her that I wouldn't hurt her. After you just effortlessly destroyed an alpha male in front of their very eyes. Maeve sighed happily. I did, didn't I? She grinned smugly. Anne rolled her eyes and swore at Maeve's arrogance, before smiling warmly at Eva and beckoning her in. Oh, Eva, I'm sorry about Maeve. She's a little... Anne paused, trying to think of a suitable way to describe Maeve's character and personality. Spicy? Maeve offered with a smirk. Willful and arrogant sometimes. Anne continued loudly, trying to ignore Maeve's chatter. Rude of you, she retorted before Anne shut her out completely. She doesn't always think before she acts, but I promise you, she would never hurt you. Anne finished, managing to keep the irritation out of her expression at Maeve's constant interruptions. Relief seemed to wash over Eva, and she bounded into the room with a worried look on her face. Are you okay though, Anne? I tried my best to keep him out, but when I tried to stop him, he was just so strong, she said forlornly, hanging her head in shame. Anne chuckled. I'm proud of what you did though, Eva. Do you know how many females would have just rolled over and done as he asked? The fact you stood up to him says a lot about you. Eva's face lit up. Thank you, Anne. That means a lot. She answered happily before a look of realization crossed her face. Oh, I almost forgot. I came here to tell you that Alpha Nocturne will be here to pick you up shortly. What? Anne exclaimed loudly. Why? Fuck! Eva looked at Anne in confusion. I'm sorry, Maeve said to call him to come and collect you. Should I not have called him? Anne was positively fuming. She couldn't believe that Maeve would reach out in that way and make it appear as if she couldn't take care of things herself. How was she ever going to get him to take her seriously if he had to run to her rescue when things got a little difficult? Anne sighed heavily and tipped her head back in frustration, her shoulders sagging. Did you want me to call him back and tell him that it's not necessary? She asked quietly. No, it's fine, Eva. Don't worry, I'll handle it, she said wearily. He'll be about half an hour anyway. I'll fetch you another coffee while you wait, Eva said decisively. Anne watched her leave before she turned to stare angrily out of the window. This wasn't shaping up to be the best day today. Even with her run-in with Brad, she was still going to be expected to attend the stupid engagement party. Anne snorted. How delightful that was going to be. She wondered idly what sort of reception she would receive from her stepmother and that conniving bitch of a stepsister, but eventually decided that it wasn't worth worrying about. Whatever happened, she just had to make sure that she stayed calm and kept Maeve under control. The thought of Brad in bandages at his own engagement party did bring a small smile of satisfaction to her face, though. As Eva dropped her coffee off and they chatted about trivial company matters, Anne's phone rang. Eva excused herself and made her way out of the office, closing the door behind her. Once it was closed, she answered the call. Hey, sugar tits, how's things? Lexi's voice chirped out brightly. God, I wish you wouldn't call me that, Lexi. It's so crude. Anne grimaced, rolling her eyes. The sound of Lexi's amusement rang out clearly from the speaker. I'm sorry, I can't help it. You know I love teasing you. I can't stop long, actually. I just called to let you know. I have the dubious pleasure of covering your god-awful step-bitch Ada's engagement party tonight. I didn't want you to think I'd gone there willingly. Anne snorted. I'll see you there then, Anne answered dryly. Fuck off! Are you seriously going? Lexi shrieked angrily. Before you start, yes, I am. My dad wants me to go apparently, and if she wants to gloat, she can do so with pleasure. She's going to be pissed when she sees the state of him anyway. Why do I feel like there's a story that I need to know behind that statement? What happened? Anne smirked. Maeve. Loud hoots of approval were thrown loudly from the other end of the phone, and Anne couldn't help but laugh. Ah, Anne, I really love your wolf, you know. I know that you're in good hands when I'm not around to kick butt for you. Lexi sighed happily. Oh, fuck. Lexi, I need to ask you something actually. If you don't have time now, it's fine. But can we arrange a time to meet up and chat about it? Sure. What did you want to know? I'd prefer a little heads up if I'm going to need to find out more. I might be part demon and witch, but sometimes I wish I had seer abilities too. It would make my life so much simpler sometimes. Anne chuckled. Well, it's a long story, but I wondered if there was any possible way to fake a mating mark between two people. Obviously, with both of their consent to the fake marking, but I mean, is it possible? There was a long silence from the other end of the phone, and Anne could almost hear the wheels turning in her head. I guess it's possible. I'd have to speak to my dad about it if I can get hold of him. It doesn't sound like it would be too different from a standard binding or blood contract. Wait, why are you asking this? Anne laughed. This is why we need to arrange to meet up so we can have a good chat about it. Find out what you can do for me. And if you know anyone that can do it, we'll arrange lunch or something. How does that sound? Just then, a knock at Anne's office door reverberated around the room. Fuck, I have company, Lexi. I'll see you tonight then, I guess. No worries, sugar tits. Love you, Lexi sang happily as she hung up. Anne sniggered and shook her head. Lexi would never change, and for that, she was immensely grateful. It's open! Anne yelled as she placed her phone on the desk. After a few seconds, the door opened, and Alpha Adam Nocturne marched into the room with his Beta Allen and 5 burly men following behind. Anne's heart sank as she realized that Alpha Nocturne had gotten all the way through the company building and actually made it into the area where her offices were located. The fact that he was here at all was going to spread through the rumor mill at the company building like wildfire. She groaned internally, just imagining what sort of interrogation she was going to face from her father. She knew that her father disliked Alpha Nocturne. She had heard far too many rants over dinners together to think otherwise. Now he would want to know exactly why he was in his building, and when he found out it was because of Anne, well, she shuddered to imagine the fallout. At least she no longer had to worry about a wall of silence waiting for her when she got home and the sneaky tricks of her stepmother and stepsister. What are you doing here, Adam? She asked with a sigh. He rushed over to her and stopped abruptly in front of her, just short of taking hold of her, but she could feel his eyes raking over her in an attempt to assess her for injuries. Are you hurt? He asked gruffly. His wolf sat just behind his eyes, glaring out menacingly. Really, I'm fine. I'm sorry to have bothered you with all of this. I know you must be busy. It was Maeve. She can be a little willful at times. Adam frowned. That's not the version of events that I heard. No? Well, you should learn to treat me as your Luna, shouldn't you? I handled it. It's no big deal. His eyes found the bruise marks around Anne's neck, and he growled. That doesn't look like nothing, or that you handled it effectively. Who did this? Really, Adam, I asked you a question, Luna. If I am to trust you, then you need to be honest with me, as I will be with you, he interrupted fiercely. Anne scowled at him defensively. I don't know why you're so worked up. Answer the question, Anne, he growled as he took a few steps closer until his face was almost touching her own. He wrapped his arms around her as if embracing his mate and murmured quietly in her ear, I need you to tell me, Anne, if you are disobedient, it won't go unpunished. A shiver of anticipation ran through her body, and she forcibly suppressed a whimper as Maeve purred happily inside her. Oh, a punishment sounds like it would be fun. You're not helping, Maeve, Anne replied, furious that not only was Adam ordering her around, but that she was very much turned on by the thought of what his punishment might entail. I know I'm not helping. I'm not trying to. I want him to punish us. I want him to. Maeve smirked before she was abruptly cut off. That's enough, Maeve, Anne roared internally as she shut her out. Adam chuckled beside her as he traced his lips along her cheek. I can smell you, you know, your wetness, he murmured huskily as Anne's heart rate increased. You're making me want to sip inside your slick, wet folds all over again. Well, that's lovely for you, but I don't have time for this, Adam, she replied testily, stepping away from him as he glowered at her with his smoldering eyes. For the first time in her life, Anne was completely flustered, and she wrapped her arms around herself in a protective gesture. Anne, I do not like people touching what is mine. Like it or not, you are mine, and you have been treated badly. I cannot let this go unpunished, Adam insisted as he stepped towards her again with a look full of meaning in his eyes. Anne glanced towards the men that he had brought into the room with him nervously, and he paused in his advance, turning his head slightly towards them. Adam realized that the presence of his men was making Anne self-conscious, and with a wave of his hand, he dismissed them. Anne swallowed a little nervously as she realized that she was alone in the room with him. You didn't have to send them out, Adam, she offered weakly as she took a step back. He almost looked like he was stalking her as he moved toward her purposefully. Anne flinched as her backside came to rest against the table and watched Adam with wide eyes. You don't need to be scared of me, Anne. Although we're not fated mates, I still intend to treat you as one. And this, he growled softly as he indicated the finger marks on her neck, should be punishable by death in my eyes. Adam, please, Anne whispered softly as his fingertips traced the marks on her neck and his brows furrowed in concern. There is no begging, Anne. Not unless it's for my cock, he smirked. His fingers trailed their way down her neck and across her breasts as held her gaze firmly. His fingertips continued lower, trailing down along her stomach and along the surface of her thighs. Adam leaned forward until his lips were mere centimeters from her own and smiled softly. Tell me who did this, Anne. I can't, she began, but her words were cut off by a breathless moan as Adam slipped his hand up her skirt and traced the outline of her folds with his fingers. He pressed firmly on her sensitive nub and chuckled at the moan that escaped her lips. Just their name, Anne, he coaxed. Oh, fuck. Adam, we can't. Not here. There's no such thing as can't. I am your alpha, and you are my Luna. You are mine to fuck and mine to pleasure, and mine to protect. He growled huskily as he moved her panties to the side and ran his fingers along her slick folds. Anne gasped as his head dropped to her neck, and he lightly bit the tender skin. You have no idea how much I want to bury myself inside you right now, Anne. Anne whimpered as he began circling her nub at a torturously slow pace, and she bit her lip as she fought the urge to push against him, desperately seeking the sweet pleasure and the sensation of him filling her inside. Adam lifted a hand to cup her face as he began to attack her lips, swallowing her moans as her legs quivered with the sensation that he was slowly building inside her. Without warning, he removed his hand from her pussy and ended his assault on her lips, splaying his hand across the surface of her folds and pressing down, as if attempting to seal it. Anne shuddered at the delicious pressure and simultaneously whimpered at the sudden removal of his attention. He smirked at her and repeated the question yet again. "The name, Anne. Just tell me the name, and I'll give you what you want." Anne's cheeks flushed furiously as she fought with the desire he had aroused in her and battled with her conscience. She was torn. Maeve had already sent him away with his tail between his legs, and with the pain of the rejection and his wolf refusing to help him, she wasn't sure if he deserved the punishment that Adam would dish out. Although she had pushed Maeve's chatter away, she could still feel her disapproval and anger ripple through her at Anne's hesitance to punish Brad further for his transgressions. She bit her lip and looked up at Adam hesitantly. "You can do it, Anne," he coaxed again as he brought his right hand up under her blouse and found his way under her bra, rolling her nipples gently between his fingers. She gripped the table for support as her legs began to feel shaky and unashamedly pushed her hips forward, desperately seeking him inside her now. Adam chuckled as he began to slowly circle her throbbing nub again, and Anne moaned loudly as her head tipped backward. "Fuck, Adam, I want you inside me," Anne whispered huskily as Adam growled in frustration. "Name first," Adam snarled as she whimpered under his touch. "Oh, fuck. Okay," Anne panted as he increased the speed of his attention on her nub. As she felt the fire build inside her, she struggled to catch her breath, and without warning, Adam pushed 3 fingers inside of her as he squeezed her nipple firmly between his fingers. "It was Brad! Oh, fuck!" Anne yelped at the sudden intrusion inside of her. "Good girl." He smiled as he curled his fingers inside of her and pumped his fingers in and out of her, relentlessly. She felt his hands removed from her breast momentarily, and the sound of his zipper being undone filled her with anticipation. In one fluid movement, he removed his fingers from her dripping wet pussy and flipped her around so that she was bent over the desk, pulling her skirt up and around her waist. Adam positioned himself at her entrance, her panties pushed to one side as he gripped her hips on either side. "Good girls always get rewarded, Anne. Do you want your reward now?" He growled huskily. "Yes. Oh, yes. Adam, I want you." Adam pushed forward into her, the bulging tip of his cock stretching and filling her as he pushed forward slowly inside her, his hands firmly guiding her back. "Anne, you're so tight," he hissed as he filled her completely. Anne whimpered as he began moving in and out of her, and she grasped the table for support. His chest pressed against her back as he reached forward and slipped his fingers between her legs, rubbing at her sweet spot as the speed of his thrusts increased. She bucked forwards against his fingers as his cock slammed into her until she had his hand trapped against the desk, his fingers working frantically as she panted and moaned loudly. Adam grabbed a fistful of her hair and pulled her head upwards, turning her face towards him as her back curved into an arch to meet his demands. Adam's mouth covered her own, devouring her swollen lips, the motion of his lips and tongue inside her mouth almost matching his thrusts as he swallowed all of her moans. He suddenly tipped his head back and growled, "Fuck, Anne, what are you doing to me? I just want to be inside of you, forcing these moans from you in every way possible all of the damn time." Anne whimpered helplessly as she felt herself about to come undone. Her breath caught in her throat as she moaned and stiffened slightly, and Adam began to pound into her with such a ferocity that she was left breathless. Adam stiffened and grunted as he slammed her back onto him, and her climax came at the same time as he emptied himself inside of her. The walls of her pussy milked him of every last drop as he shuddered behind her, panting hard. She couldn't believe that she had just allowed him to fuck her in her own office. She had to work at this desk, and now she would be forever reminded of this moment whenever she sat here. Adam pulled out of her and tapped her naked ass, smirking as she turned around to glower at him with flushed cheeks. He slipped a finger around the waistband of her panties and flicked the elastic playfully against her skin. "I'm going to need to take these," he said, pulling his trousers back up and fixing her with a charming grin. Anne's heart seemed to flutter in her chest as she took in his playful appearance and instantly erased the feeling, scowling at him as she stood upright. "Not a chance. Why on earth would I give you those?" Anne glowered as she began to pull her skirt back down. Adam quickly grabbed her wrist and stared into her eyes intently, his irises still black with desire. "Because if you don't, then I intend to turn up here every day that you're at work and repeat today's encounter as many times as I see fit." Anne paled slightly and begrudgingly slipped them down over her legs, bending and picking them up gingerly. They were soaked through with her wetness, and she grimaced as he took them from her hands with a grin and shoved them into his pocket. Anne curled her lip in disgust as Maeve purred happily inside of her. "Your musk is addictive, Anne," he shrugged nonchalantly. "You're a pervert," she muttered angrily. Yes, I am, and you love it, Anne." Adam had disappeared shortly after their steamy session with his beta Allen, leaving behind 2 of his men as protection, despite Anne's protests. Anne wanted to talk to Adam about Lexi and get an idea of how he felt about any possible solution they might come up with regarding the lack of a mating mark. Although it wasn't an issue now, she knew it would be in the future. The elders weren't stupid, and neither were the pack members. Having a temporary fix would at least shield them from suspicion for that issue. She had to admit she was incredibly curious about his particular curse, though, and as they arrived back at the pack house, she resolved to ask him about it once things had settled down a little. She would have to get through the stupid engagement ceremony relatively unscathed, though. Anne couldn't understand why her father would want to rub her mate's betrayal in her face like this. It was such a cruel thing to do in her mind. If she hadn't ended up entangled with Adam, she wasn't sure what sort of emotional state she would be in right now. "I don't know why we have to go listen to them gloat anyway," Maeve grumbled testily. "It won't look good if we don't go. Try to remember that I'm still a member of the royal family by birth, whether they like it or not. It's expected that we attend all of the official functions." Anne sighed as she made her way through the common areas of the house and took a seat at the kitchen table, flicking her phone out. "Well, I expected my former mate not to shove his dick where it didn't belong, Bo." "Yes, I know, Maeve. We've been over this so many times. It's over and done with now. We have to move on. Geez, you're like a dog with a bone." "I'm a wolf. We are canines. We like to eat," Maeve answered as quickly as a flash. Anne groaned internally as Maeve sniggered. "Okay, that was the wrong terminology there. I walked straight into that one. Maybe you're more like Brad than I thought, seeing as how—" "All right, stop. Look, if it makes you feel any better, at least by going tonight we can inspect your handiwork and see what state he's in. You know as well as I do that the rejection is going to be all the more painful thanks to his wolf's refusal to help." Maeve's ears picked up, and Anne could feel her slowly coming around to the idea. "Come on, Maeve. I'm not happy about this either, but at least you'll get to see how much he's suffering," Anne coaxed gently. With a snort, Maeve agreed, suddenly anticipating witnessing the misery that Brad would be in. Anne rolled her eyes at Maeve's sadistic tendencies and scrolled through her phone, catching a message from Lexi purely by coincidence. "Hey, Call me when you're free. I have a solution, but it depends on how your tasty piece of muscle feels about it. Anne snorted and picked her bag up, deciding to head to her bedroom. She had a feeling that this sort of conversation wasn't one that she wanted to be overheard by any of the pack members that might be milling about. She hesitated at the door to Luna's room and looked guiltily at the door to the bedroom that she and Adam now shared. Really, she could do with having an office at the pack house for sensitive calls. She didn't really want her work-related calls to be held in public either, and she preferred to separate her workspaces from her personal spaces. Adam doesn't seem to care where his personal spaces are for intimate business, Maeve smirked. I'm fully aware, thank you, Maeve, she answered as her cheeks flushed furiously at the reminder of her morning's activities. Anne pushed the door to Luna's room open, running her hands over the beautiful engravings of the door as she did so, and found herself wondering about the former Lunas. She shut the door behind her and took a seat on the bed as she dialed Lexi's number. Hey, gorgeous, what's up? Lexi's voice answered breezily from the other end of the phone. You said to call, so Anne trailed off. Ah, yeah, sorry, sweets. I'm absolutely rammed with work at the minute. I completely forgot I sent you that. We were getting rammed not so long ago, Maeve commented in a perverted tone in her head. Shut up, Maeve, Anne hissed in reply. You're no fun, she wailed miserably. Hey, tell Maeve I said hi, but also to pipe down, will you? I hate repeating myself, and I need to let Dad know what your answer is as soon as possible. Tell her to go blow goats, Maeve answered sweetly. I won't tell you what she replied, Lexi. Honestly, she was so much quieter before we moved here, and now all of a sudden it's like she's transformed into a perverted she-wolf in heat. Anne groaned in frustration. Excellent! It's about time you got laid, Lexi snorted. See? I'm not the only one who thought so, Maeve sniggered triumphantly. Oh my God, will the two of you shut up? Anne exploded angrily. The sounds of Maeve and Lexi sniggering in tandem had Anne fuming in silence. I thought you were busy, Anne snapped testily at Lexi. I am, but I've missed teasing you. She sighed happily. Anyway, Dad says he might have a solution, but I don't think either one of you is going to like it. Anne listened intently as Lexi explained the options that she and Adam had available to them. So Dad thinks a normal binding won't do the trick by itself. We talked about the possibility of a tattoo to hold the magic weave and perhaps an item, but you both need an actual physical manifestation of the bite mark, right? Lexi explained. Right. I suppose it's kind of like a scar, but it never disappears as the mark left is an acceptance of the claim and marks each partner as off-limits to others. Doubt it would have stopped Brad. It didn't stop your father either, Maeve muttered angrily. Anne chose to ignore Maeve's comment, but she knew that Maeve was right. The mark wasn't infallible. It just signified ownership if you really thought about it. Dad already explained what would happen if you tried to mark someone that wasn't your mate, so I know that it's not possible to do that alone. But we were thinking, if we infuse the mark on each of you with Dad's binding magic and magic to prevent healing, he thinks that it might work. Anne chewed her lip as she thought Lexi's words over. It wasn't a bad idea in theory. They would be bound to each other and wear each other's marks, and it would scar as normal. By all outward appearances, it was entirely possible that this might work. There's just one catch, though, Anne, Lexi added hesitantly. Anne frowned at the tone of her friend's voice. For once, she actually sounded a little hesitant. Why do you sound so worried, Lexi? What's the catch? Lexi was silent for a few seconds before she sighed heavily. You would have to suppress your wolves after you were marked so Dad can perform the required magic before it begins to heal. Anne's heart sank. There was no way that Adam was going to go for this. An alpha without his wolf was an easy target, and she doubted that he would consent to be made so vulnerable. I don't know if he'll go for that, Lexi, Anne said, the disappointment in her voice inadvertently leaching out into her words. Lexi sighed lightly. I know, sweets, but it's the only option that we have. We don't even know if this will work, but it's the best that Dad could come up with. We can be discreet about it. Dad can come to you, and so can I, and you guys can do your thing, bite each other, and then we'll come to you and fix everything else. Will your dad be okay surrounded by shifters, though? Lexi snorted in contempt. I'm sure Dad would eat these little shifters for breakfast in his true form, Anne. No offense. An underworld is a big place, and so are the beings that inhabit it. He hasn't been up here since, well, making me, I guess, so he's a little excited at the prospect of a holiday. It's a bit sad, really, Anne chuckled. She had next to no knowledge of the demons' worlds, only the histories of her world, and they did not speak kindly of the demons that had infiltrated society with the help of the Midnight Covens all those years ago. Okay, I'll try and catch him to ask what he thinks. If we don't have any other options, then he really doesn't have a choice. I cannot answer for him, though. No worries, sweets. By the way, what time are you arriving at the disaster of an engagement banquet tonight? Lexi asked casually. Goddess, I don't know. Maybe 6? I can't be late. I don't want to upstage anyone, and really, I should be there to greet the guests as well. Anne sighed. Sucks to be you, Lexi teased. Don't remind me. Anne snorted before her face suddenly brightened as she realized that Lexi had no idea the state that Brad would be in tonight. By the way, don't be surprised if Brad is a little worse for wear when you're taking pictures. Anne sniggered. Oh? Do you have some juicy gossip for me? I think I'll leave it as a surprise for you. Let's just say that he turned up at my office earlier and Maeve made an appearance. Lexi squealed in jubilation at the mere thought of Maeve getting her revenge. Oh my gosh, I would have paid to have seen that, she groaned regretfully as Anne chuckled. I'm sure it will make for interesting photos tonight for you anyway. Anne laughed. I can't wait, she shrieked excitedly before the sound of her hand over her speaker and muffled words could be heard. Sorry, Anne, I have to go. People are incompetent and need me to do their jobs as well as my own. Catch you later. Anne grinned to herself as she hung up and threw her phone on the bed. She supposed that she should really start looking at a killer outfit for tonight. She knew that the gossiping socialites wouldn't make it easy for her. Speculation would be rife as to why she and Brad had parted ways and why he was now engaged to her sister. She was interested to see how it would all play out. As much as she didn't want to go tonight, she would make damn sure that she would knock them dead with her appearance. Anne arrived back at the Alpha King's palace to much fanfare. Reporters were lined up outside waiting, and the flashes of the cameras began snapping furiously the moment that she stepped out of the car that had been sent to collect her. The security personnel followed her closely as she made her way up the gold-embroidered red carpet that had been laid at the entrance and ran up the steps. She waved and smiled demurely, ignoring questions shouted at her as she made her way to where her father and stepfamily stood waiting for her. Anne had been very careful with selecting the outfit that she had chosen tonight. She wanted to make a subtle statement that she was no longer a woman that was reliant on her father's good graces, and that while still loyal to her father and their royal lineage, her priorities were different. The best way that she could do that was by dressing not in the reds and golds of the royal family, but instead wearing the traditional colors of royal blue and silver that were prominent in Alpha Nocturne's pack. After all, she was Alpha Nocturne's Luna now, and as far as everyone else was concerned, she was his true mate, and he, against all odds, her second chance mate. Ha! They know! Look how pissed the whore's expressions are, Maeve shouted gleefully. She was right. Her stepmother looked as if she wanted to murder her where she stood. Ada's face was set in the familiar fake mask of smiles, but her jaw was clenched tightly and her stare unbroken as Anne approached. Anne's father just looked confused at her choice of outfit as his eyes swept over her in a cursory glance. Anne beamed widely as she ascended the stairs and greeted them all courteously, but with no warmth in her words. "Did you forget the dress code for official functions?" her father asked with a slight frown of displeasure as he embraced her stiffly. "Not at all, father. As I am no longer living here and representing another pack as their Luna, as well as the heir to the throne, I have two roles to fulfill now," Anne answered smoothly. Ada almost choked on the air that she was breathing. "What do you mean, Luna? Of whose pack? Where?" she spluttered furiously. For once, Anne's stepmother had the decency and decorum to shush her daughter and remind her that these issues were best discussed inside and away from prying eyes. With a furious glare from behind her mother's back, Ada was ushered inside by her mother as Anne walked side by side with her father. They walked in uncomfortable silence for a while before he finally spoke. "You found a second chance, mate?" he murmured as casually as possible, although Anne could feel the pained expression in his tone of voice without even looking at him. "I did," she replied shortly as she kept her eyes focused forwards in the direction of the ballroom. "And you accepted?" He tried again, not hiding the disappointment in his voice. "What would you have me do, father? Bring him home for you to approve of so that Ada can sleep with him?" "I think not." He grabbed her wrist suddenly and they paused in the corridor, with the eyes of several of the servants on them both, looking busy so as not to intrude. "I'm still your father, Anne," he answered, the hurt clear in his voice. Anne turned to stare at him coolly, and her heart hurt too at the expression on his face. But he had made his choice already. A father that loved his daughters equally would not allow this charade to continue, Anne replied icily. Anne, a father that had any love for his daughter would not force the victim in this shit show to attend and play happy families. You're a disgrace as a father, to me at least. I'm sure Ada feels differently. If I am not a priority for you, father, then don't expect to be a priority for me, Anne interrupted, her voice slightly louder and unafraid of being overheard. She turned and continued on her way to the ballroom, and after a slight pause, her father hurried to catch up and took his place at her side again. "Who is he?" he asked gruffly, clearly displeased at Anne's change in character. "That's none of your business at the minute. I'll decide when and if you meet him in person. For now, I'd rather wait until this whole debacle is over." "The least you could do is tell me which pack," he replied, the irritation in his voice starting to rise the longer that Anne refused to roll over and tell him what he wanted to know. "I said no, father," she hissed furiously. Anne was struggling to contain the irritation herself, although she was grateful that Maeve had at least settled down and had been quiet for now. Perhaps it was the aura of her father keeping her in check. "Then what the fuck am I supposed to tell people if they ask?" "Figure it out for yourself, father, just like I had to when I realized that my father couldn't give two shits about the daughter he had with his fated mate. After all, why would he? If he was willing to destroy the bond that the goddess was gracious enough to gift him with, why would he possibly give a shit about a child that he fathered with her?" Anne said, as she whirled furiously. Her father's face paled in the face of her fury, and he swallowed nervously, a flicker of regret in his eyes. Anne's heart lurched painfully as she stared at him angrily. The man before her no longer looked like her father anymore. He looked old, almost weak. When had he become so old? Anne sighed heavily and looked away, her heart full of pity for the old man standing before her. "We're going to end up arriving separately from your wife and daughter. Let's go, father, before the gossipers get even more out of control." Anne stood at the newly erected dais at the forefront of the ballroom with her parents as Ada fussed anxiously at Brad's late arrival. The press and socialites had previously been whispering behind their hands regarding Anne's choice of outfit, and many had already correctly identified the colors as belonging to Alpha Nocturne's pack. Not that she told them whether they were right in their assumptions or not. She would leave that to their detective work. It would give them something to do to fill their time anyway. Anne smirked to herself as the whispers now turned to Brad's lateness to the engagement. They critiqued his lack of respect for the accepted procedure and Ada's lack of decorum with her stamping and wailing. A strong she-wolf held her own and relied on no one but herself to solve her issues. A strong Luna would keep her mate on track for scheduled appointments and required functions. Ada was failing to do either, and the wolves in attendance were vicious with their tongues. All of a sudden, Anne spotted Lexi among the crowd of the press being processed for entrance to the function, and she grinned widely. She excused herself, and with a reluctant nod from her father, she left the dais and made her way over to her. Ada watched the back of Anne hurry over to the doorway and sneered, "This is all her fault. I can't believe she got over Brad so damn quickly. I hope she gets what she deserves," she hissed as her mother narrowed her eyes dangerously at her. "If you hadn't been so damn impatient and just gone along with our original plan, this wouldn't be an issue. I can't believe you were stupid enough to get pregnant to such a weak wolf." Anne's stepmother, Narcissa, hissed angrily at her daughter, Ada. "She fucking deserved it. Acting all high and mighty, she's nothing. Why should she get to enjoy her life while I fucking struggle?" Ada hissed back quietly. "You need to calm down. You made the choice to sleep with Brad, and now you have to face the consequences. I can't believe you got pregnant with his bastard child, Ada. You better hope that it's born strong for our sake." Ada pouted angrily and wrapped her hands protectively around her belly. She hated Anne and she hated Brad, but the baby? She already loved everything that she had in her. She didn't care that Brad's seed had given her the life inside of her. The baby was hers and she would do whatever she could to protect it. "I have to admit I'm curious though, Mother. Who the fuck would be dense enough to take a weakling like Anne on? Are you dumb, Ada? Did I not tell you to pay attention to the pack hierarchy? Are you even my daughter?" Narcissa retorted coldly. Ada's face fell and a flash of hurt flickered in her eyes at her mother's words. "Anne is a hell of a lot smarter than you give her credit for, and if you would have just set aside your childish jealousies, she could have been useful." "Pay attention, Ada," Narcissa whisper yelled as she rapped her hard on the head with her knuckles, drawing more than a few curious glances at the two of them. "Look at what she's wearing. Whose colors are those?" Ada frowned as she tried to rack her brain for the answer. She hated history and politics. It bored her. She much preferred to learn about the engagements that she would be expected to attend and arrange, as well as the additional lessons from the private tutor that her mother had arranged for her. Narcissa snorted contemptuously. "You don't have a clue, do you?" she sneered disdainfully. Ada had lost count of how many times her mother had snapped at her tonight. Ever since Anne had turned up, it was all her fault. Anne was making Ada out to be a fool in her eyes. She scowled off angrily into the distance as her mother pinched her harshly on the arm. "Ow! What was that for?" "I swear to all that is, Ada, if you don't start paying attention soon, everything is going to be ruined. Do you know how many years I've worked for this?" Narcissa hissed furiously. "She's wearing the pack colors of Alpha Nocturne. He was supposed to be your husband, not Brad. But because of your immaturity, you've royally fucked that plan up." Ada's eyes widened in shock. Anne had stolen her future husband? How fucking dare she? Ada's blood felt like it was boiling as she glared daggers into Anne's back, as she chatted with that filthy half-breed friend of hers. "I won't let her get away with it, Mother," Ada snarled angrily. "Oh, you will. And you'll not respond to any provocation from her. Do I make myself clear?" But Narcissa interrupted her ferociously, silencing her with a look that promised death if she stepped out of line. No, Ada. It seems that I've been far too lenient with you. Call it the weakness of motherhood, she snorted disdainfully. You are under the illusion that you are capable of taking control of these matters when you have no such authority. You will wait, and you will do it silently, without causing a scene. There's too much at stake here. Do I make myself clear? Ada stared at her mother dumbly for a few seconds as she took in the unfamiliar face of fury. It was as if she didn't know her mother at all. She nodded silently and turned away petulantly as her father came over and distracted Narcissa. If her mother thought that she was going to leave Anne alone and not seek revenge, then she had another thing coming. Anne looked back toward the scene of her stepmother and Ada clearly having a very public disagreement and sniggered. It was probably about her, and the thought made her happy in a strange way. "Lexi, over here!" Anne shouted to her friend as the guards turned to find the source of the interruption and immediately bowed their heads respectfully. "It's okay. She's here as official press, and if it gets her through quicker, in an official capacity as my friend." The guard with the checklist looked down at his list and frowned, clearly catching the whispers of discontent among the waiting parties. "Oh, is this the assistant you were waiting for, Your Highness?" he asked nonchalantly as a meaningful look passed between them. "Yes, exactly that." Anne smiled gratefully as Lexi waved through. Once safely inside, Lexi rolled her shoulders and exhaled heavily. "Geez, it's tighter than nuns." "Lexi," Anne chuckled, "you have to behave here, especially if you are here in an official capacity, don't forget." She grimaced and shrugged as she focused intently on the digital screen of the camera she had brought along. "They wanted a journalist from the agency to report, so here I am. If they don't like it, they can eat my ass." She snorted as she frowned in concentration. Anne watched her struggle with the camera for a little while as they made their way to a quieter area of the ballroom. She grabbed a drink for them both from one of the passing waiters, and they took their places unobtrusively on a little chaise lounge at the side. "Ah, Jesus, finally. God, I hate these things sometimes," Lexi muttered as she turned her attention fully to Anne. "Okay, sorry about that. These damn cameras can be a nightmare sometimes. Now, Maeve, Brad, spill." Anne chuckled. She wasn't sure it was a good idea to discuss that with her here. If the wrong person heard even the slightest whisper of what had gone on, she was sure that the resulting PR disaster would not be pretty. "I think I'll probably need you to read between the lines a little bit here, Lexi. You know our hearing is better than most, so bear with me," she grinned. Lexi nodded along as Anne gave her a very much diluted chain of events up until now. When she had finished, Lexi's face had morphed through so many emotions that Anne was emotionally exhausted just from watching her. "I don't know what Brad was even thinking, but fucking hell, Maeve. Well done. I swear, if I had a wolf, I would want her to be just like Maeve," she whispered in awe. "How's she coping with tonight?" Lexi continued, her brows creased in worry. "Actually, she's a little quiet. I thought she'd have more to say about all of this." Lexi grimaced, gesturing wildly at the ballroom around them. "Yeah, me too. She's very quiet, actually. I'm not sure if she's angry at me or just depressed with the whole situation. She was a little snarky when we arrived, but that's about it." Lexi frowned and stared at Anne intently. She laughed awkwardly and pushed Lexi on the shoulder lightly with a grin. "What? Why are you staring at me like that?" "Nothing. It's probably nothing. I was just thinking, that's all," Lexi replied finally after a bit of a long pause. She sighed and stood up, looking around them with a trace of disdain. "Well, I suppose I'm going to have to actually do some work while I'm here. Don't particularly want to show any of this in a good light because of how fucking awful they've been to you." She grimaced. Anne smiled softly and stood, moving closer to her and squeezing her arm reassuringly. Honestly, it's fine, she grinned. I'm pretty much over it. I have my alpha, for a little while at least, and who knows? Maybe things will finally turn out for the better. She grinned. Lexi returned her smile and covered Anne's hand with her own. Listen, if that alpha does anything to hurt you, I'll personally rip his balls off, she said seriously. Oh my days, what is it with you and Maeve? Anne laughed loudly, causing more than a few heads to turn toward them in curiosity. Phone. As they were about to separate whilst Lexi mingled, and Anne began to return to stand at the dais, a loud commotion arose from the entrance behind the dais that led to the banquet hall. Lexi hurried over to Anne, changing the direction of her attention almost immediately. An audible gasp rose from those gathered around the dais, and Anne and Lexi hurried forward, the sea of people parting before them in order to let Anne through. Anne gasped as the more than disheveled figure of Brad emerged from behind the chairs that the happy couple was supposed to sit on. No fucking way, Lexi exclaimed gleefully as she raised her camera to her face and began snapping away merrily, a jubilant grin plastered across her face. Brad looked awful. His hair was a mess and he continuously fidgeted with his clothes. His skin was sickly pale, and he looked like he hadn't slept for weeks. Anne felt a brief pang of guilt as she took in his appearance. Rejections hurt, and they put you through hell physically as well as emotionally. And that was exactly what Brad was experiencing right now. If she hadn't had a good reason for rejecting him, then she too would be experiencing the exact same pain that he was now. Brad's eyes found hers in the crowd, and he held them sadly. Ada tried desperately to get his attention, but he barely looked at her. His attention focused entirely on Anne. Ada whipped her head around, following the direction of his gaze, and after a few seconds, she found me. The fury and loathing in her eyes made my stomach turn. You! She screeched as she turned and pointed to me, forcing everyone else to turn and stare too. You did this! There were audible gasps from the people around Anne as they stepped back and away from where Anne stood, and Anne heard Lexi's hiss of anger beside her. Anne's father! The Alpha King stepped forward hurriedly and pushed her arm aside angrily. The words he whispered furiously were heard by everyone, despite his intentions. Control yourself, Ada. Now is not the time. Accusatory eyes swiveled between Anne and the group on the dais. Already everyone was quickly forming their own opinions, and the whispering had begun. Narcissa joined the Alpha King in attempting to calm Ada as Brad shuffled and staggered his way forward to take his seat on the chairs. He slumped down on one with his head bowed as Ada pleaded with her parents to fix it and make it better. Her face took on a grim look of determination as she realized that there was no fixing it tonight. The pictures of the pregnant wolf and the unwilling alpha would be plastered across tomorrow's headlines whether she liked it or not. The Alpha King gestured for Anne to come forward as Ada took her seat next to Brad, and Lexi whistled lowly under her breath. What a fucking car crash. Good luck. Anne said nothing and walked slowly towards the dais, feeling all attention riveted on her as her father spoke to the assembled guests. Please, excuse my daughter, Princess Ada. This is a stressful time for her. We had hoped to keep the news a secret for a little while longer, but as I'm sure you're aware, Ada and Brad are expecting pups. He beamed proudly as the crowd gasped and questions began to be fired in quick succession at the family on the stage. Wait, but I thought that Alpha Brad was mated to Princess Anne? That's right. They were supposed to have been married this week. What is this lunacy? Did they have an affair? Poor Anne, and forced to attend this debacle as well. What sort of family does that to their own daughter? Anne smirked as she took her place next to her father and maintained a neutral expression. It felt oddly satisfying to have people recognize the situation for what it was. A quick glance to the side revealed Ada and Narcissa glowering furiously at her, and Brad's eyes still riveted on her, full of sorrow. Her father, however, faced the direction of the crowd resolutely. "That's enough gossip," he growled furiously. For some reason, Anne and Brad's wolves recognized themselves as mates, but they were mistaken. Ada is Brad's mate, so as you can see, all is as it should be. When the truth was revealed, things were corrected instantly. A split of opinion buzzed around the room and Anne seethed internally. How could her father lie so easily about this? Then why is she pregnant already? The marriage was only called off at the last minute. I don't believe it. I wonder if they knew but carried on regardless? I heard the sisters' relationship isn't good. Anne snorted to herself as the last comment reached her ears. How ironic that what her sister did to Anne was now under suspicion of doing to her sister. She could feel Ada's smirk as she reached for Brad's hand and squeezed it reassuringly. "Anne, really, what my father said is right. Mistakes happen. Perhaps because we were always so close, the mixture of our scent on one another confused him." Ada simpered sweetly, although the warmth of her words didn't match her eyes. "I don't hold any grudges. I just hope that my sister is happy wherever she ends up." Anne didn't flinch and stood resolutely at her father's side. "Now that the misunderstanding has been cleared up, let's proceed with the rest of the event, shall we?" the Alpha King announced, clearing his throat awkwardly. Anne moved to the side of the dais as the greeting of guests by the happy couple commenced. Brad was distant and unfocused throughout, offering only grunts of acknowledgement or murmured words that were barely distinguishable. The longer it went on, the more irate Ada became, and Anne could feel the palpable aura of fury that emanated from Ada in waves. Lexi appeared to be having the time of her life, though, and when it came to the interviews with the couple, she made sure to ask lots of awkward questions that were phrased in such a way that Ada couldn't help but incriminate herself, no matter how she answered. As people began to move through to the banqueting hall as the food was served, Brad finally forced himself to move and tried to approach Anne. She blatantly ignored him as Ada pulled on him furiously, and as he snatched his arm away, she didn't miss the words that he hissed at her, nor did a few of the socialites that remained close by. "You are not my mate and never will be. You'll never replace Anne. All of this is because of you," he hissed angrily. Ada looked momentarily taken aback, and her cheeks flushed furiously. "How can you say that? I'm carrying your pups, our child." Brad sneered as he swept his eyes over her. "Are they mine, though? I don't know what you did to me in order to get me into bed with you. I don't remember any of it, but when I find out," he threatened darkly, leaving the sentence hanging in the air. Brad staggered off into the back room, using the wall for support as he walked, and Ada glared furiously at Anne, narrowing her eyes. She stomped over to Anne with her hands held protectively over her belly and glared defiantly up at her. "Are you happy now?" she hissed. "For what? You're the one who wanted me here. I would have rather stayed away. I wanted you to see it with your own eyes, and I haven't finished yet, Anne. I meant what I said when I promised to take everything from you." She spat before stomping away again. Anne watched her warily. She was fully prepared for the fact that her invite here today would most likely be in order to embarrass her publicly. Now, with that plan seemingly going so badly, she would most likely have something more up her sleeve. She wished Maeve was more responsive. Perhaps she had shut herself away to avoid dealing with the drama, but that wasn't at all like the Maeve that she knew. If anything, she had expected her to come out kicking and screaming. The silence was unsettling.